dude, I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, welcome back to another episode of The Farm. We are sitting down. Today, we're actually going to dive in with our guys over from Action Types. Action Types they're actually you've heard some of the stuff with MPE, Motor Performance Experts. They actually got a lot of their information, not a lot of their information, they got their information from this group originally. And again, they kind of branched out and they continue to kind of add extra layers. So we're going to actually dive in with this group. Kind of getting through, we actually have multiple guests today, so we're gonna get to hear from like one of the originators and how he kind of pulled all these things together. And then also on top of that as well, we're gonna go through some different ways of like how it applies into biomechanics. I actually asked some pretty tough and challenging questions and have them expand on some certain things. And then we also talk through how, while it is a foundational piece, that they, motor preferences and how we look at this is not a rigid ideology or a rigid, we need to stay inside of our profile, and if we don't, all these catastrophic things are going to happen. There's actually a lot more to it. There's a lot more context of how these things are being expressed. And so I asked some of these challenging questions, kind of opened up some dialogue, and explained, jumped into some of this. And also too, just want to let you know, you got to settle in now, because this is a long one, right? So this is going to be over, I think it's like over 2 hours and 30 minutes, a podcast. Definitely check, step in, make this multiple times when you're in the car, settle in and at the house, any of the things, if you guys want to watch the video version of this as well, because there is some parts where we pull up some different presentations or we do some other things as well. So there might be some spots where you might want to watch the video. Make sure to check out those options as well. And then also if you need any, you want to check out more resources or any of the things that they also provided or they talk about throughout the show, we have that in the show notes, so make sure to check that out as well. But let's get into it. All right, so now we got all the guys in here together. Again, we got everybody from all different locations. I'm gonna let everybody introduce themselves. It's been a conversation that we've been talking a lot about on social media. I'm happy to, get to the roots of some of this information and let it, hear it straight from some of the original voices. And so I'm, excited to have everybody on. I'm going to pass it around and let you guys introduce yourselves. And again, I don't know necessarily who wants to go first. I don't know Steve or who's starting, but why don't you guys go ahead and we'll kind of get to know you guys a little bit.
I think we can have Bertrand himself starting it up.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe it would be better that Prashant or Steve starts.
No worries, I'll start. Don't worry, I'll get on rolling. Awesome. Look, my name's Prashant. I'm an ECB level 4, which is the highest qualification in cricket coaching. I've been working as an international remedial bowling coach. So if people fail their ICC testing, so they're throwing the ball. In our sport, we've got to keep our arms straight beyond a certain point. So the second we start seeing people flex and extend from the elbow, they'll call me in for the quirky ones. I always get the really weird ones. I've been doing that for probably about 12, 13 years. And what I found is when I started, I could get them to pass their test. They might be a couple of miles an hour slower, but they often came back with different feels. So they would say, in this particular position, this felt really weird. Like, I don't know if I'm allowed to use the word, but I'll do it and you can edit it out. So one bowler from Pakistan, he said, Prash, every time I'm having the bowling with this new action, I feel like I'm having a shit every time I'm having a bowl. And I was like, really? And then I tried it myself. I was like, I just don't feel what you feel. I don't get it. And lots of different people were saying that they felt different things when they were in certain positions. And it really got me thinking, so my background's biomechanics. I did a master's in it. And I was looking to go beyond that. But then I started seeing that it wasn't necessarily working. And then I'd heard through the ECB about action types. It was a nightmare getting hold of Bertrand. So it took me a fair while to get on the course and get cracking. But I think once I did get started, things just quickly started making sense. The stuff that I was seeing, when I reviewed all the videos and stuff, it was like, no wonder. Actually, you move differently to me. You move like this, so I can understand why you feel like that way. So I think that's been really sort of useful for me. And there's so much to this. So I'll pass it over to Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I can say about the same things. I mean, I used to be a pitching coach, both on the amateur and the professional level, up to the minor leagues, and I might always be a little bit out of the box thinking type of guy. But the things I saw through the years is that as technology advanced so much, that also the amount of injuries increased. And for me, that put out a lot of question marks. And then about 6, 7 years ago, I got introduced to action types. And during the pandemic, I was actually, I mean, we were all locked up, and I was able to start transferring action types principles to baseball and transfers and stuff. And then I saw so many things that we could have, as pitching coaches or as an industry, baseball industry, that we could have provided by just knowing each individual profile and knowing the stuff we need to know, knowing about the two, for example, the two absolutes, about motor preferences regarding knowing, for example, a pitcher's most healthy, most energy saving arm slot. So that type of stuff. And now I'm only talking on the pitching side, and same thing with hitting and obviously running and that type of stuff. So right there, I mean, my eyes opened big time in order that, yeah, everything was pretty big related to how that individual body wants or needs to move.
Awesome. Yeah. And Bertrand, why don't you give us your background as well? I know when we originally talked, Bertrand was like, "Yeah, we got it. We have to get him on, right? If we can get him, that'd be amazing." So yeah, I want you to kind of give your background. I know, again, like some of the origins. I know you have some history and some things you can share with us too. I'd love for you to kind of expand on all that.
Of course. Also, I would be the only one with French speaking accent. Okay. Yeah, of course, my mother language is French, so I learn English because, of course, I had also a background as a national coach in Switzerland. But I was working in volleyball, so I was working in a very different sport. But I mean, talking about arm swing and everything, we have the same problem in volleyball. So everything that Prashant and Steve were saying, we see the same. I saw the same. I was working with my friend Ralph Hippolyte. He's former from was born in Haiti and did some he's a university studies in the United States, and was also a coach of volleyball coach in the US before coming over to Europe, and became friend quite quickly because we were talking and exchanging a lot. He's about 13 years older than I am, so he's 75 now, and we were both involved in volleyball coaching high level. He was the coach of the national team, women's national team in France, and I was a coach already by the youth team in Switzerland when I was already 27. So we met around 83, 84 in Switzerland. And we had a passion about performance and a passion about movement and a passion about coaching, of course. And we were exchanging up to the point where we were witnessing how many schools there are, how many tendencies that are used or that are taught in volleyball. And of course, it was the US time at that time, because 84 was a big moment for US volleyball, as they won the gold medal in Los Angeles. And so they had their school, but before it was the Russian school, and then you had the Chinese thing and Japanese thing way before 64 Tokyo. So we were following the momentum of development of coaching in volleyball. And I, of course, had the chance to meet a lot of different people like Ralph. I had a chance to meet a guy in France that was very, I mean, very special guy. He had some degrees in psychology, sports education, and also in medical science. That guy created in France what he called the psychokinetic approach, which was basically how to study movement when you are human. So how do humans use movements and things like that. So that was before 89. And he accepted to be my mentor in terms of following my work, my diploma work in Switzerland, at the Lausanne University. And so it's, by the way, it's the IOC town, so the Olympic Committee town where I was born. And I had the chance to have that guy that was already ahead of his time in terms of how he was analyzing things, trying to create some different approach in terms of physical education in school and everything. So that was another influence that I had at the time. And as I said, I was already a national coach, and I studied biology at the university in Lausanne. And then I went to physical education because I thought it could be better for me. Personally, my intuition said it would be better to stay on the pitch, stay on the court, and not only do lab things, which would have been my future at the time if I have stayed in biology. So I said, okay, physical education after biology, why not? And I was a volleyball coach, and I knew the power of the court, the power of the pitch, which means you see incredible things there. You see the differences. You see that people are not using the same techniques. And we were asking with my friend Ralph at that time, why are they doing what they are doing? So when you were asking for something like, okay, do this or do that, we were seeing that they could do a little bit of what we were asking, but as soon as you turn your back, they're coming back to what they like. So if we just start from the fact that they don't want to cheat or they don't want to do something else than what we were asking, then of course when we are asking something, we have to look in the mirror and say we are not asking the proper question or the proper request, which is we are not taking into account their needs. What do they need in order to express themselves in our sport, volleyball? So I tried with Ralph to study a little bit of the differences we could assess or we could observe. And myself, I trained with different techniques up to the point where I could blow my shoulder with injury because I was trying something that was not appropriate. So I was forcing to follow some guidelines into what was said in some models, and of course I had a big injury in my shoulder at the time. So I understood at some point that we should take care of the individual and take care of what they need in order to express, and that was a big of the start of the journey. So maybe I can go over to Prash and Steve just for a moment so that they can a little bit express themselves about what I said, because I think they did the same about what I experienced when they met me. I know Steve met already Peter Murphy first, which is our first action type practitioner in the world. So he helped us start the journey in around 90 something. And Prashant had the same also kind of insights when we met. So let's give them the voice a little bit.
Yeah. Why don't Rashawn, why don't you kind of just open up with some of those things as well? I feel like we've headed to the point of like how action types started to get formed and kind of some of the insights of what you guys experienced as well. Can you kind of like lead the story into how that actually began and like these experiences that you guys had that kind of led you guys towards all this?
Yeah, so for me, what happened is we have the England and Wales Cricket Board, and probably about 12 years ago, they invited Ralph and Bertrand in to have a look at the men's squad and see what they noticed were the differences. Because commonly on the coach education, everyone will say everyone's different. But when you hear the coaches speak, it's very rigid. And even though they say everyone's different, it's just everyone needs to hit these checkpoints.
Yeah.
And I was very much like that as a biomechanics coach. Like when I used to teach initially, it's like, oh, your top elbow must point here, the back elbow must point here. And it was like, why on earth are these kids not doing it? It's so simple. I can do it myself.
Mhm.
So like my journey started with they gave me some PDFs. I tried to find out more. On the level 3, we actually had a physical. So action types is actually on the learning modules. On our level 3, we actually had to do push tests, which was 3.0 testing, we'd call it in our version. And we were doing it, but we had no clue what we were doing because the lecturer was really excited. He made it very magical. So
Yeah.
when you're doing it, it was like breathe in, breathe out. What's the contrast, red and blue? We walked out all confused at the bar, thinking like, what are we supposed to think about? Red, blue, like breathe, this, that. Like we just don't get it. So there was no real sort of cricket context put into it. Whereas now on the level 4, I've just started helping out with the actual delivery of it. We go into basic principles with how people move, how their visual system works. Then we have little practicals to sort of example it, see if people, how do they feel when they do it, get into different postures and try things. So now we've moved more from theory over to practically trying things. And I'm trying to redevelop it for them because they've got certain things that they want to deliver, but I think it's a little bit overwhelming. But when it comes to things that you might notice, like for instance, in my sport in particular, um, you'll get batters that have very narrow stances. So their feet are probably about armpit width apart, even narrow in some instances. Not much knee flexion goes in there. And if anything, they'll sort of hinge from the hip. So the head sort of goes outside the line of their feet. And the brain is almost saying, right, let me go towards a fielding position called point, which is like perpendicular to where the ball's coming from. So people, batting coaches will constantly say, you need a trigger movement. So before the ball's released, you need to be in movement. But what we find is how you initiate that movement depends on their motor profile. So some people need to initiate in a certain way. We can actually work that out. Or what I do with my kids is let them explore a range of possibilities. And they'll come back and say, Prash, I really love that one. These ones I'm not really sure about. So you can learn it and experiment in lots of different ways. And there's quite a few different parameters. But I think the amazing thing about all of it is whatever we say on Twitter and all of these bits that come out, you can physically test all these things. So you can do physical things. And even I use self-talk. So we go into the mental side of the game with pros. Right, if you talk in this way, let's see what the impact is. Right, if we change the language now, what do we see? Ah, right, you can't produce any force anymore. What's going on? And then once they sort of work out what kind of self-talk works for them, we create a routine. But this links back into lots of different things. So I'm sure we're going to go through all of those kind of bits as we go.
Yeah. No, no, and I know that we so quickly, and if I can give you guys a little bit of the background that I had on motor preference coming in is years ago, back, and I know Rasan, you kind of followed me back when I was at the 108 days out in Southern California, is back then again, obviously, just like you guys, I share with your guys' storylines as I was tied into movement. I was a exercise science major in college. Again, I took way too many classes, transferred too many different times, all the other things. But most of the background that I had was self-taught. I've read so many more textbooks outside of college than I ever did inside of college. And also too, not only from social media, but also getting to get mentored, as you guys mentioned, by different people along the way. And again, along with that, we became, again, these movement patterns and the ways that people, moved and all this stuff became very obsessed with what can turn into performance. Because at the end of the day, again, within baseball or any other sport, obviously performance is king. And so as we studied some of these things, I came across all these different ways that people were evaluating and categorizing these different movement types or capabilities of different athletes. So at one point, it led me across motor preference. Now, probably like 7 years ago or so, right? So like 7 years ago or so, I came across motor preferences. Now at the time, a lot of the information that was out was very low level. A lot of it was about animals, right? And how these different animals and like, okay, this is like, aerial and terrestrials, and these are the different ways that they move. This is X, Y, and Z. And so they started going through some of that. And like you said, the application was a little weak within research, and there wasn't a lot of resources out at the time. Also, you didn't have AIs, the internet, like social media wise, people were, again, much what it sounds like at the time, as Bertrand mentioned, is at the time there's all these different camps that teach different things, and they all have different feels, and they like to stay within their niches, right? And so we started to explore, what, with different athletes, how we saw them move, we would give them different things based on how they moved to, lead towards some of these results. Now, with that being said, that's why I wanted you guys also too. And again, I don't know who necessarily wants to take this question, but as I mentioned, kind of in some of our notes, if you guys could kind of just open up the beginning stages of like motor preference and like where it's rooted from, right? Where the ideas necessarily come from, just from its like literally origins in the sense of, again, like I said, some of the stuff I was looking into was animals and a lot of those things back then as well. What are like the origin story of more coming back to motor preference and, the foundation of it in whole?
Okay. If we have to get back to the foundation, maybe I may start. First of all, there were not a lot of people interested in developing or studying differences. Okay, we have a tendency when I'm looking at the human way of approaching science, and I can talk about biology at the same time, to look at what kind of is the same, but we are not always looking at what is different. That's a natural tendency in terms of science, because we want to generalize. We want to create things that are easy to manipulate, easy to understand. Okay, let's just start with the fact that easy doesn't exist. Okay, that's a concept. Easiness or simplicity is a concept, which means nothing is easy. Okay, it's a way to look at things. Because if you understand something, it's easy for you, but as soon as you want to explain to the other one on the side, it becomes difficult. Because they're not understanding the things as you are.
Yeah. Okay,
so that's a little bit of the background, which is as soon as you dive into differences between people, of course we have we have humankind, and we have the same origin, and we have the same roots. And that's for sure. And at the same time, when you look at nature and diversity on Earth, it's a huge thing. Okay, all the animals, all the insects, everything, and so on and so forth. Okay, so when you give the power to nature, you see diversity. Point. And every time nature can create more diversity, it will, because it's a natural motor thing. It's a natural evolution, let's say like that. So when you are in the womb, when as a baby you are in the womb, you start to differentiate. You start to become different than the others. Even if you are having twins just beside you, you're getting different from the one beside you. So we know that the brain of twins are different. They are different. Okay, and as soon as they develop, they grow apart. They may stay connected. There are a few studies saying that they have some communication channel and connection, but they are different. And when we profile twins, so I did about, I don't know, I profiled maybe 20 pairs of twins that are genetically identical, so monozygotes. They don't have the same profile. So first of all, let's start with that. It's not genetical. Okay. The profiles are not genetical. they may be here very soon or very early in the womb, as soon as the babies are or the embryos are differentiating, but it's not genetical. I also had the chance only once to profile triples. So I had 3 young guys, 7.5 years old, coming to me because the father was educated. And he asked me, could I do that? Could I profile the 3 guys? And I said, yeah, why not? And the mother and everything. So I had the chance to have those 3 little guys there, 7.5, that came to me and that were not also aware of what's going on, but they could experience the differences. And of course, I had at the end 3 different profiles. So, but if you look at them, I mean, hopefully they were not dressed the same, but I couldn't really see the differences between the 3. It was very, very obvious that they were, I mean, sharing the same genetical background. So different profiles. So the question is why, in fact, why do we have to witness these things? On a biological point of view, if you just agree with the fact that peoples are differentiating quite early in life, in fact, a baby or any animal, because we may talk about other animals, of course, they differentiate as soon as they develop, just because they they bear what we call unicity, which means they are unique. They are different. They are unique. They may have the same background in terms of species and everything, but they are differentiating as soon as they can. And that's, from my point of view, it's because we have multi possibilities. We have many possibilities to develop in a body, okay, with let's say anatomically speaking, right, left, up, down, front, back, and everything. And we are a 3D structure. So it's a 3-dimensional structure that has to self-orient, self-organize, self-develop, which means an animal has to understand where is the head, where's the tail, where is the right and left, and everything. And we can do that a bit more in a complex way because of our consciousness coming. But you need to have that sense of the 3D perspective, which means we have right and left. So do you start with the right or do you start with the left? Okay, which one you would you choose? Up and down, tail and head. Okay, front and back. These are potential movement that you can use, starting right, starting left, starting front, back, up and down, that needs to have some kind of structure, of kind of compass, let's say internal compass, because you cannot do everything at the same time, okay? I cannot start right and left at the same time. Or maybe I can do that, but I go straight then. But if you want to go straight, you need to do a first step, which is, are you putting your first foot on the right side or on the left side? You can do both. But still, having a preference to put your right foot or your left foot in front is a huge advantage in terms of evolution and development, because it's something your brain will not have to do, which means you can automatically do the movement, either right or left, we don't care, just because it is possible. So it's a potential. So we are talking about potential movement of the body, which can use all those dimensions in our 3D world, and timing, of course, with time around, to start something, to develop any coordination pattern that may be possible. So it's all about potential movement. There are a lot of potential movement available in the body, a lot of muscles, a lot of joints, a lot of possibilities, and we need to have preferences to facilitate the coordination. Okay, because we cannot do everything at the same time, and that basically is the first level of explanation. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no.
So
yeah, no, I think one of the parts I wanted to circle back on and some of the things that you mentioned, right, is when it comes to these preferences, and I know we kind of brought this up of skill acquisition and some of the science that's obviously built behind there and how we build patterns and how they come from, unconscious incompetence and how they progress all the way through, right, where they're, unconscious competence and, all the stages of with this as well. I'm interested because you made a point there that I wanted to circle back on is you talked about how it not being genetic, right? Obviously these preferences, as you guys mentioned and as you guys have opened up on, are things that happen much earlier on in life, and some of these preferences are made. So when you guys view that from those two different lenses, and I know, Prashant, you kind of mentioned about some of the skill acquisition side when I originally started asking about some of these things, how do you view those two worlds kind of coming together when we look at like preferences and then also the development of skill, specifically when it comes into not necessarily like skill for a sport, but we're talking about like general skills like we talked about, right? Like I prefer my right hand over my left hand, right? And I develop these things, right? How do those worlds for you guys come together where they're married, but also to complementing each other rather than in competition with each other, if that makes sense? How do you guys view that?
yeah, maybe Steve, you want to go for it? My point is, if I start talking, I could go for 2 weeks talking in a row. So my problem is I don't want to take all the time.
No. No, I mean, obviously, we all know, depending on the profile you have, that each profile has certain, how you call it, properties. And regarding the properties are connected with, the way they move, their preferences, what they prefer, or they prefer to be a little bit more global towards the body, or they prefer to be away, do stuff away from the body, or they're more like on the right side bias or on the left side bias. All that type of stuff combined dictates and puts you in a certain, let's call it a certain window. It's not a closed window, it's an open window because it's not a box where you put into. But regarding those preferences and those properties, right there, you can start doing stuff and things are coming together because now you know their profile, now you know what's their perfect position is to be in. And it all comes back to the perceiving action cycle. As we know, is the action is actually like an expression of the body. Okay, so the way you perceive things, so the body's going to express themselves the way it perceives stuff. So if you're already in a different for you wrong position, you're going to perceive the world differently. So your action is going to be completely different too, to where it comes from.
Yeah.
So, and that's what you see, for example, in especially in the baseball world, which I don't have to tell you, is there's a lot of boxing with standard culture, for example, pitching mechanics. So people are taken and put in a certain way of moving, which is 100% right for somebody in the room, but maybe not for you.
Yeah.
So if you're in that different position, you're going to perceive things from your environment, from the world, completely different. So your action is not going to be related or one-on-one with the way you should be moving. Now, would that mean that you won't be able to move? Of course, you're going to be able to move, but it's going to ask you way more energy. I mean, it's going to be way more, how you call it, stress on your body and that type of stuff, where obviously you put your body in a certain position of danger.
Yeah.
So in there, that's so important. I mean, I had a question from a guy who's a minor league hitting coach this year, and he had a guy, and the guy was hitting. I mean, the first 2 months of the season, he was hitting a buck 50. I never saw the guy. Okay, so he sent me a couple of videos on him. I tried to do from a distance because I was in Europe, he was in the US. Just make like a very standard profile, and what we told him to do is like, hey, just try to put him in his right position to start. So he went back with the guy, went into the cages, and just put him in the position he needs to start into. They didn't talk about mechanics, nothing special. So the guy was hitting a big buck 50. His next 50 ABs, he was hitting 360. Just by putting him in a spot where he needed to be in to hit the ball. The same thing, for example, with a pitcher, minor league pitcher who had like a so-so changeup. And the changeup was like, what was it? I think it was like 8 to 12, if I can remember. 8 to 12 horizontal movement, which is, I mean, yeah, below average for a pro guy, especially double A guy. So the only thing we did, I talked with the pitching coach, like, just adjust his grip towards his profile, which he was a walking top guy, so posterior dominant individual. So we made his grip where he used more his posterior muscle chain. Now, from the first pitch he threw, pitcher, coach, and everybody around was looking at each other like, where the hell did that came from? A couple days later, he used it in the game, and he was between 17 and 19 horizontal movement. That happened overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's another reason right there that you see that the data today became the goal, but it should be the aim. And the thing is, if you put the person, the player, and his right preferred motor profile, the data or the result or the spin rate or the exit velo or whatever we can talk about will come from there.
Yeah, and so going to that thing, how do we? Because again, just as Rashawn, you kind of mentioned this earlier, how coaches sometimes will say, yeah, everybody moves different, but then when they go to teach, they make everybody kind of do some of the same things, or they come up with some of these rigid ideologies with it. Obviously, is, again, not only as the years of experience of me coaching professional athletes and, all-stars across the league and all these other things, I've obviously not only mentioned that these guys they all start in different positions. They all have their hands in different spots. They all had these different, and then also too, I think there's a differential between preferences and then also their motor preferences, which I think the word preference can get pulled out and used in a bunch of different ways. So I think that's something that's important. But one of the things I wanted to mention there, and I wanted to kind of get back to this because I think it's a key thing, is obviously the body will adapt, right? It will adapt to what we're having, how we train it, right? What activities we have it do. It's largely adaptable, right? So when we look at like skill acquisition, again, we have 12-year-olds all the way up to, we've seen some of these massive adaptations. Obviously, when here locally in the States, and I'm Steve, I'm sure you know him, is Randy Sullivan. Again, when he has, big into Franz Bosch, some of his stuff, and I'm sure you guys have kind of touched on some of these things as well. But one of the things, along with that, right, is like how we train it. And one of the things he says is, human tissue doesn't have free will, right? So it's meaning like if we stretch it, like, okay, well, the tissue is going to get longer, right? If we're doing things all the time that are making it, how we train it, the body's going to adapt to the demand that we're placing upon it. So when you guys view that within the scope of motor preference, again, I put it this way, I 100%, 1000% agree that there is movement patterns that athletes prefer, right? That they fall back into those patterns all the time. With that being said, I've also seen some of these patterns change. And again, there's a difference between what's going on under the hood, right? What's going on internally comparatively to how the motion is being expressed. Totally. I see there's a differential between those two. So when you guys look at that from adaptation versus rigid box, as you mentioned, as you guys have talked about a couple times, of not making things rigid, I know that in the space, because motor preference is starting to become more and more popular, people will utilize their motor preferences or a profile, and they will make it rigid, right? And I know that we've talked about some different points of this, so that's why I'm kind of like diving a little bit deeper. I know we're kind of going in the weeds a little bit, but I am interested in the skill acquisition piece and how that intermixes with how does it become not rigid, right? And based off of a profile that someone may have developed at a youth age, and how does that intermix with skill development and adaptation as they age and as they train, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very good. Of course, it makes sense. I think there is, of course, a danger here when we are talking about preferences, as you mentioned. Preferences are not something where you want people to be stuck inside anything. They are expressing their preferences in a very natural way. So we don't have to do exactly the same what we want to avoid. Okay, we know they will express their preference if we give them the space and the time to do it. The problem is now about coaching, let's say coaching philosophy, which goes more onto, okay, if I'm a coach, I have to have power on what the other one is doing. So I create external constraints to the body of the guys that I'm working with, and maybe forgetting that the body of any individual has already inner constraints. So I should respect the inner constraints.
Yeah.
And by the way, we call it in a scientific way, not motor preferences, but motor signatures.
Yeah.
Motor signatures is the correct expression.
Yeah.
And they can go on one of our internet site, which is motorsignatures.com, where a few of the information that are scientifically related are gathered.
Yeah.
Because of course there is a lot of burden in terms of the motor preference world, because it becomes something that people can sell.
Yeah.
And when you try to sell and market something, there is always a huge danger because you become simplistic.
Yeah.
It's easy to sell
that,
simple things.
Not to cut you off, I just wanted to notate before we move on from this point is one thing I've loved as we've talked, and Prashant's been a great advocate of this, is I've talked about, right, is as you mentioned, sometimes these things come across as these absolute statements are being made. Like, for example, I've heard statements like, oh, this guy's a terrestrial, so he is going to use this type of bat. Every terrestrial is going to use this type of bat. And it's like, okay, that absolute that's been given, especially specifically when I've heard statements like that, when I know, generally the type of profiles that I fall within, especially when we're going a high level of just, aerial terrestrial, like it's just this or that, and there's not a spectrum in between of all those other things. I specifically within that profile did not like that type of bat, right? And so while that is a high level and it's not really that important in this, that's not I'm talking about the root as you're mentioning, right? Is sometimes it's because it's become more popular. And what I've loved about the thought of, as you mentioned, is from a science perspective and performance, I'm not interested in selling it, right? And I'm not saying that I am interested in people offering services where people become more educated, for sure. Love that, right? If we can help other coaches get more results with athletes, 1000%, I'm all for it. But as you mentioned, sometimes within these things, and I don't want these things to get blown out of context, because I'm all in for athletes getting more better results, is that when these absolutes get thrown out, and also from my experience of just training athletes, it's rare. There's rarely it's either this or that, and that's it, and that's the end of the story, because that's literally not science from its base. And I loved what you said earlier. I always say we develop science to understand nature. Nature doesn't understand science, right? It doesn't go by the rules of science. It doesn't go by how we categorize it or how we like to do things. Nature is nature. And we are trying to understand nature. And sometimes when we bottle it down to a 101, or we put it into these boxes so that we can better understand it. We have biology, we have all these different sciences, skill acquisition, all these things. These are all different sciences, but to nature, it doesn't know any of these different sciences. It is nature, right? It is all of those things all at once, all interacting. And so I wanted to make that point because I love what you're going into, which is something I wanted to explore, is that, again, that these things, somebody's profile, it would be so important for us to understand and how they naturally, right, generally right now, what they would like to do. But also with that being said, when we start pushing all these absolutes, they have to move this way, they have to do this, they have to do that, or they're not going to get these results, or they're going to underperform, or the opposite way too. I don't know. And again, maybe we get into this, maybe a different subject later down, is also I've seen patterns that athletes prefer, right? Or tend to a signature of theirs, which is also causing some of these overuse or injuries or, things as well. And some things we need to be mindful on that side of things. And again, I'd be interested to have you guys kind of talk. That's why I want to go down this path, because I know there's so much more than what surface level gets shared via marketing in a minute and 30-second clip. And I wanted to do a long form thing like a podcast so that you guys could expand on these things, because again, I know that there's a lot of misinformation out there because, of this minute and 30-second culture that we're kind of in across the board, right?
Bertrand, is it okay if I just speak to him just quickly?
Of course it
Is
is.
that okay? Sorry. Joey, so that you understand it, a motor profile isn't you are exactly this all the time. So what happens is in our world, we look at it as you've got a big loop where you are relaxed, you're energized and you're ready to go. Okay. So physically, like cognitively, you can be anything. Okay. But physically, we'll see certain things. Okay. And what happens is when you're tired, you're stressed, or you're learning, you go into what's called the small loop. And in there, the posture changes. So in my environment, when we run trials, for instance, and even when I see my players from 60 yards when I'm coaching, if I see a postural change, I know something's up. Either they're tired or they're stressed out. So at that point, I can run out a drink, tell them a couple of things that they need to focus on. The posture changes back and they can go. But sometimes it doesn't, and we need to adapt. So all of the stuff that we talk about isn't about you must play in this one way all the time. It's whatever the brain is telling you to do, and you can feel it. Like you'll understand it once you're aware of it. My weight goes into this position, my shoulders here, and they're telltale signs. Adapt. So in my environment, what you'd see is the people that I described earlier with narrow feet, less knee flexion.
Yeah.
If I watch them in a trial, and I'm happy to share videos with you after this,
Yeah.
you'll see a massive knee flexion happens in there. And I've seen this with international players. And straight away, I know something's going on in the head. Even when you have conversations with people, if you watch someone and the posture from neck down is the same, watch the nose. Whenever they look at you, they don't look gun barrel straight with the nose at you. It's either slightly to the left or the right. And when they're confused and I'm talking to someone, you'll see it flick. And I know that they haven't understood what I'm talking about, and I can re-explain the thing in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And then if they change their posture in certain ways, I now know that they're learning. Okay, so there's a lot more to it than just saying you're terrestrial. We don't really even use that language. You're walking bottom. We've got different motor profiles that you've got, families, and you jump between one and the other, right?
Yeah.
And you can visually see it, you can hear it. When people change their posture, they can actually access different parts of the brain and speak differently. If you listen to them say the same story, like we did this with Bertrand in the office once, same story you're talking about with different postures, the language used is very different when you hear it back. So your brain is capable of so many millions of things.
Yeah.
But I think like that's one thing. But the other thing that you were looking at, like the way that people learn. So, for instance, we've got Dr. Wolfgang Schorhorn, who's a huge proponent of action types. Now, he believes in differential learning, and that's something that we would definitely advocate. So, very rarely do I go in, right, you are a C2, so you must go right, and 100 checkpoints. It's just too complicated. Okay. But we would notice certain things have to happen, to be in flow state, right? And it's all about them understanding themselves, how to adapt when they need to do, right? And staying within preferences. There's only two preferences that look pretty structural, we'd call it, that will stay very similar. So you've got horizontal versus vertical and your mobile point. Okay. But even under like we saw a lady, she came in for one of our basic courses, highly stressed out, and her motor profile changed. So when we profiled her, I was getting a different one. She was like, I'm not that. And then once she'd got through that turmoil in her life, the next time I saw her, she was back to normal. So things can change, if you've got serious injuries and stuff like that, things change. But the key is you're definitely not one thing all the time. Because if you imagine like you're walking down the street and you've got luggage, right? If your palm will either face forward or back as you're dragging this luggage. And when you get tired, it flicks without even thinking. And imagine you go for a 5K run. I'm not fit. I'll get knackered once I've run 100 meters. Okay. But you'll see that the pelvis will tilt forward or back. So me, generally, it will tilt a little bit more forward. My weight will lean forward. As I tire, I don't give up. My pelvis will tilt, brain shifts. And we can physically show that the brain has shifted. Your first two brain functions, you can do certain things on the head, which we won't go into. And then when we swap them into small loop, you could see that it's physically changed. So we can show all of this kind of stuff. But I think what would be really interesting is if Bertrand went through differential learning, because he's very interested in how people learn. Is that okay, Bertrand?
I mean, I was wondering if you would allow me to share a screen. Okay, so why I wanted to share that, because these are also rooted in the origin of the approach in the big 89, beginning of the 90s. We were interested in a guy that wrote a book in 82 already. He's a guy that did his studies in Switzerland, but he's from the United States. And he was the first to link typological concepts, which are more psychological, to the physical realm. And he was using the four families that were discovered by Carl Gustav Jung and published in 1921 in his book Psychological Types, which was at the time published in German. And Jung is a Swiss guy also. That's quite interesting. And he was creating the first motor skill link between what Jung was saying at the beginning of last century and his idea of conceptualizing the different things, and they put together some things, and they came out with four motor families. So we use the four motor families, and we studied the four motor families to look on the pitch what it was, how they were expressing. And we came up with the four things, which is distal, global, rhythmical, and conceptual. And we used D, G, R, and C, like Prashant was telling here, C2 motor profile, to just define a little bit what we see. Of course, it's not always very easy to understand what is behind those words, because we had to find letters, D, G, R, and C, that we could use in French, German, and English, because we are teaching in all those three languages. And that was already a first challenge, to find let's say, words that we could use in the three languages.
Yeah.
But what I want to pinpoint here, it's not that. It's the four motor families, like Prashant said, anybody can use them. Okay, anybody is using them every single day in their life. So I would say, to be clear, that there's no one day in your life when you don't express the four. But a day has 24 hours, and you express them sometimes while sleeping, because you are just rejuvenating, you are recovering from your day, and your body needs to express through one of them. So they cover everything we need. And if I'm moving forward, hopefully I can here. Let me just give some of the insights that we lately gained in the last years. So you have the four motor skills that are expressed here with Roman numbers. And you have the first one, of course, that we could call the comfort zone. Because in your conscious world, so when you are conscious in your day, it's the one you exploit the most and where you feel home. So it's the one where you have some sense of control and comfort. So it's the main system, okay? So the problem is, because you're conscious not the long hours in 24 hours, it becomes your home, and you have a tendency to come back to that one, saying that this one is the truth and the rest is not.
Mm-hmm.
So you reduce your spectrum to that one because you are more conscious about it. But in fact, as Prashant also was saying before, there is the second one, which we call also the exploration zone, which is the recovery system. So every time the first system is out of order, let's say, to make it very mechanical, out of order, it gives the hand, it gives the go to the second one, and they are fully complementary. They are fully complementary. So you recover in the second one while you let the first one completely recover. And of course, the first and the second one, they are both the systems that you will be conscious of on a certain point. But maybe if we put some numbers, you may be 70% on the first one when you're conscious, and maybe 20% on the second one, which may be more active in the night when you are recovering. But there is also the third one and the fourth one. So if the first and the second are very complementary, we have also backup system, the third and the fourth, that I only understood in 2017. At the beginning of 2017, I understood a bit better how they were organized, and it's why it allowed me to finish my book, which is explaining everything about that. Because before I had some holes in the explanations, and as soon as I understood how the third and the fourth were functioning, then it came to me that we have everything at hand. We have everything that we can use. And the third one is very interesting, because sometimes the first and the second, they mess up, which is you have, like Prashant was saying, you have a moment where the constraints in your conscious world are so huge, and the pressure and the stress is so big, that the natural functioning of the two first is just under a lot of pressure. And we can give at that time, we can give the lead to the third and the fourth that are also complementary, and they can allow us to stabilize in our life a little bit of what's going on, just to create some safety, some security, and also to consider new options, which is create new ways of functioning. Of course, the third and the fourth, we are not very conscious about how they function, but that's something we can learn. So we had an example, because I don't know about the US and the name Zinedine Zidane in soccer, which is one of the or was one of the best player in the world. But that we had the chance to be able to publish 2 pages in one of the leading journal or sport journal in France, because Zidane was turning 50 years old, and we had to analyze a kick that he did in Glasgow to win the Champions League in Europe, which is the biggest level. And we had to analyze the profile or the way he was kicking the ball, because it was a very special context. And we witnessed that he was in fact using his third motor skill to score the goal that created the difference. And he was completely unaware of that, of course. And I had the chance to meet him in Madrid, in Spain, and profile him also. And I could check if, of course, that he was using that motor skill at that time. That's something we can do and check, because your body doesn't forget anything, but you can create the context where you can ask what was used at the time, which is kind of weird if we think about it, but our body doesn't forget anything. So that's very interesting, because a lot of people ask him to do that again, which is like for commercials, publicity, which means, okay, that was nice, do it again, and use your left leg. He's a right-footed guy. And use your left leg and do it again and score it. I never could do that again, because he doesn't know how that competence emerged at the moment he needed the most. And in fact, it was because of the context. The constraints of the context were at the point where he had to change his way, so adapt, as you said before, adapt to the context and to the constraints. And he did that very naturally. I mean, it was a great kick. And everybody was amazed at the moment. But it was also some kind of creative thing, and which he couldn't reproduce afterwards. So that's interesting. And I wanted to show the fourth thing, because we all have the fourth thing, and they will, I mean, all of them, they will give you what you need to express in life, even if you are struggling and you are in difficult situation. So another way to show that is to see, okay, Prashant was, I don't know if you see my mouse here. Prashant was talking about big loop, okay? So that's the comfort zone here. The smiley guy here is just showing that first system is allowing you to express most of the time in a comfort situation when you feel fine and everything is positive for you, which means you don't feel any special energy thing. So most of the time, let's say 80% of the time, you will be in one of those. The big loop is only working with positive things. The small loop is able to neutralize when you will give negative values to what you are experiencing. Because, okay, I may encounter a moment where it's difficult for me, and the small loop is able to recover, which is able to integrate every potential negative situation for you. So the two first system, they will maybe take 80% of your time, or conscious time. So you will have maybe this one, or these ones, or this one, or this one. In fact, we don't care. You can be everything. But at the end, you also are a moment where you can use the other one. And that's the use of the third and the fourth we discovered in 2017. And they are as good as the other one, which is as a provocation. When people are talking about that, I say, okay, you can win an Olympic gold medal if one of your four, because they are able to give you what you need at the moment they are supposed to act. So there is no one that is bad or something. There is no one that cannot do something. They all can do everything, but in a different way, which is what I wanted to show. So the intelligence of the body is huge, and we just need to respect that. So maybe Prashant and Steve want to add something, or you maybe have a more question. I don't want to take too long here, but just to open the window and saying, oh no, you're not that. You are everything. You are everything, and you can move and you can adapt.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And then also, in baseball context, and Steve, I know it's a little bit, there's also a bigger difference between obviously, open skills versus closed skills, as you're mentioning, right, too, as well. Like in pitching, obviously I have my own rhythm. I have my own timing. I have my own, now they got a pitch clock. I guess you got a little bit of timing, right? But in general, right, in side of soccer, or someone's passing me a ball and I got all these, everybody's running at me, right, and I have this, I'm reacting, right, as we talk about even in cricket, or you're hitting. We talk about it a lot of times. It's old school wisdom, as they would say, we got an A swing, and you got your B swing and your C swing and your D swing, based on these different contexts. And like, yes, I have a hot zone. I would love for the ball to be here, because this is where, again, I crush these pitches when they throw these things to me. But also the sport requires me to have to do all these other things that I'm not the greatest at, but at the same time, I'm better at this more than I am at this. And again, the more adaptable I can be, the more, more I can produce overall, within all of that. And so I was also, again, as you started to open that up, I wanted to kind of tie into that, and I wanted to see what you guys thought about this as well. Is like, so for example, when you come into a task, like when it comes into like hitting, and I know cricket, this might, cross over a lot more too as well. When you come into a task that is so reactive, and because of the time constraints, because of these, as you mentioned, some of these constraints that can be so overwhelming to the system, right? Like what the pattern, the signature that I would like to do, there might be so many constraints based on, this is a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. The guy also has, all these other pitches that are also dominant, all these things, and he's throwing it to this part in the zone, even though I don't like that, right? And it's not what I would choose if it was my situation, right? When it comes into training, and specifically looking at it from this lens, how do you guys reconcile that view of reactionary sports, that while this might be quicker, this might be more powerful, right? The signature might be quicker, it might be more powerful, it might do all these other things that, again, obviously in a task like, as you mentioned, ball's flying at him, he all of a sudden has to do this, wheel kick, or he has to do this, reaction. Would you say that certain sports live more in that creative realm, because of how diverse the stimulus is that they have to face on a constant basis? Or how do you guys reconcile that of sports that are so reactive, and the patterns, and how the pattern has to adapt?
You want to say something?
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, as Bertrand said earlier, I mean, obviously everybody has the same motor preferences. The only thing is different is for one person, a certain preference is more dominant than the other one. Oh, so now the body is either in an on status or an off status. There's no in between. It's either on or off. If the body's on, which means that he can only be in an on mode whenever it can act unconsciously. Whenever there's a conscious thing going in your mind, the body is off. You're lost. So, as we know that everything that has been taught to you in life, you actually will never really be able to do that unconsciously. Because right now, for example, I'm talking English. My main language is Dutch. So I'm constantly thinking in the back of my mind for a translation or what word am I going to use and that type of stuff. Now, to come back to your question, if I cannot do something, my swing unconsciously, I'm always going to be off in my timing. I already start in a losing position right there. If you combine that with the example I gave earlier, with not being in your right body position, all those things together, everybody says in baseball, hitting a baseball is the most difficult part on the face of earth, hitting a round ball with a round bat. And if you already make it more complex to have your body in a wrong position and have your mind in an off position, so you're off, then you're not that 300, that Hall of Fame hitter. Then you're that buck 50 hitter, maybe 200 hit. So the thing is, if you want to be able to hit that 90-mile-an-hour fastball, if you want to react as a third baseman on that line drive or whatever you want to do, that body needs to be on. There cannot go anything consciously in your mind. It's got to be unconsciously. When we're talking about flow, that's flow right there. Being able to, I mean, how many times we hear a hitter, if he hits a homer, like, dang, I didn't even felt the ball off my bat. It was like I was in that tunnel. I had the tunnel vision. That's flow. That's being on right there. Yeah. Now, if we go further with a guy in the slump, either a pitcher not being able to throw strikes anymore or a hitter in the slump, what's the first thing they do? They take him, they go in the cage and go to talk to him. So you're going to even make the problem bigger because right now you're going to give him more information, which that's actually causing the problem because he's not able to work unconsciously right there in the box. So that's for me a big thing. And if you go even further, and especially on the pitching side, I mean, if we're talking about somebody having the yips, I mean, it all comes back to that thing. And it all comes back to that standard culture of how our body should move. If we compare it with hitters, I always give, for example, Hunter Pence as an example. If we saw Hunter Pence swing a bat or throw a baseball, and we're looking at it, we go like, ouch, that should hurt. Well, he was lucky that he never ran into a coach who wanted to change him because he might never been able to play in the big leagues or play in the big leagues, but might have been spent more time on the DL than on the field, like a lot of players are doing today. So that's for me a big thing right there of the body adjusting and being able to do things unconsciously.
Yeah, no, I guess I kind of look at it too from the background of traditional like skill acquisition and some of the things of changing autonomous patterns. Like for example, when someone has had a stroke and they've forgotten how to walk, right? They can't walk. Their brain is uncoordinated with the process again, right? I kind of think about this as there's obviously within skill acquisition, there's some different perspectives. It's very different from teaching a skill for the first time ever comparatively to waking up a dormant pattern and or overriding a pattern that's already in place. Like there are different processes of how we go about like training in those different scenarios. And so one of the things I was thinking about though, and one of the ways that I've applied, and so I'm interested here. So let's say, for example, when a kid and a baby is learning to walk, they go through those different stages, right? In the beginning, every step they take is very conscious, right? They're stepping, they're trying to remain balanced and they're stumbling and they have to be so conscious with every step that they take, right? But then
just to cut it here, what is conscious is not the steps, it's the intention to walk.
Okay. Fair. Yeah. And then so the intention to walk, right? So then they get to a place where at one point now we can walk around on the phone, right? We can walk around, be talking on the phone, chewing gum, having 3 conversations at the same time while we're walking without any conscious thought at all. right? So as you mentioned there, is that a separator for you, as you mentioned, of the intention? Can you unpack that? The difference of the intention comparatively to the skill itself and how you differentiate the two?
Yeah, in fact, you will create automatic movements by learning the skills, but these automatic movements, they can only be stored in a, let's say, we call that an ecological way, if what Steve said is there, which is you're going to be unconsciously competent in something. But of course, your intention at the beginning has to be consciously there for you to manage the energy to learn. Nevertheless, you can only store things that will not harm you in terms of if they are coherent with those unconscious patterns, which means you need to have coherency between the different layers or the levels as you want. Okay, you can still learn something that is not good for you because we have that plasticity thing, and we can force ourselves. We can create patterns that are not that cannot be like efficient and unconscious. That can just that you can use, and that can also, like say, destroy yourself because you're not able to express naturally, unconsciously. That's the problem of our brain. Let's say that our brain thinks it knows, but the master in our system is the body, is not the brain. So the sensomotoric or the sensomotoric level is the ground level, where you have your sensation and movement. You have billions of cells that are responsible for that, and the brain is a coordination device. It's not here to control. It's here to coordinate all the intelligences that you have in your body, because we have a lot of intelligence in our body. The main intelligence of a human being comes from the body of all animals, not from the brain, not from the brain. So we need to respect, in fact, our evolution, or let's say our roots, which are exactly rooted in action. The action was first. The thinking and all the intellectual stuff we're talking about, they came over time because we could do it. It was a potential to develop. But action was first. Action was first. Movement was first. And then, of course, we could go for emotion, for cognition, and of course, even for spiritual. Okay? But the idea that we need to respect the body and what the body is saying with the non-verbal cues. And that's a problem because the body is using only non-verbal cues, non-verbal language, and it's difficult to understand what it means. Our cognition is always here like a burden, like somebody that wants to talk, an inner voice that wants to know everything, and that's not always listening to where it comes from. So we may create a paradox, we may create our problems. We create our problems because we are not true to ourselves. And we think we know, of course. And the thing, I have a background in educating coaches in Switzerland for Swiss Olympic during 17 years. So at the highest level of coaching in Switzerland. And the first thing I was saying to the coaches coming to the courses, I was saying, thinking you know is not knowing how to think. So most of the coaches, they knew too much, and they are completely, overwhelmed by the knowledge, and they forget to go for the essential. And the essential is, what do your body need actually? And this will be moving, of course. So Steve was right in terms of unconscious thing. It has to become that way. But all the form, all the skill that we have, they can do that. Okay, so you can have a pitcher or any guy moving that can use the first, the second, the third, or the fourth in a match. Without knowing, it will be unconscious, but it will be efficient because those four they were designed. Let's say we can say so. They were designed to be efficient. They were designed to be a product of self-organization of the body. It's not a product of your mind. It's a product of your body and mind.
Got it. Okay. And then so when you guys look at the actual skill of a specific sport, right? So obviously, again, I have my, we have our motor signatures, right? Our movement signatures within it. But then also too, obviously, I can't walk over and play volleyball and I'm, elite at volleyball, right? There's obviously an individual like, skill as well. How do you guys see that interplaying with like the skill acquisition of an actual sport and how those worlds kind of intermix?
I don't know if one or the other would like to say something here.
Yeah. Yeah. If you guys want to jump on.
Okay. No, now the thing is, and you kind of like referred to that a little earlier too, that you said like, hey, you know what? Sometimes I see a guy and we make changes and things go way better with him and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But right there's already the big question is, was he moving in his natural profile?
Mm-hmm.
Or was he before at a younger age or in high school or in college or during a minor league career, whatever it was he maybe already taught to move different as a pitcher or have a different swing or have a different setup or have a different way of moving left or right? That's already the big thing. So as long as you don't know and you can't profile the individual and you don't know who you have, then obviously, and the guy is not in his natural way of moving, then obviously if you make an adjustment, all of a sudden you're going to see a spike in performance excellence. But that's why it's so important to know who you're dealing with. That's why I sometimes call it like the CSI. I call it the CSI in baseball. Kind of like if you have to if you write an investigation and the only thing like, hey, you know what, the individual we're looking for is male. He's 5'10". He has brown hair and he has a white skin color. Well, then we have only in the US have like a zillion of probably prospects. But that's the only thing we know if a player walks in. Hey, okay, he's athletically built and this and that, okay, and then we might do a couple tests like, okay, he has that type of internal rotation or external rotation degrees and that type of stuff. He's flexible, he's not flexible, he's like very, very stiff in the hips or whatever it is. But more than that, we don't have. And then obviously, because all the data we got through the years, found out like, okay, guys, hey, first of all, we got to work on range of motion in the hips. Well, we don't know the guy. We don't know his profile. Maybe that might hurt him if you're going to do that. Maybe that's what he actually needs. So these type of things are so important to know in order to take the next step. So if you don't know the individual, if you're not 100% sure of the individual's profile, then you got to do what Bertrand referred to earlier. Then you have to coach the intent. If you coach the intent, you can't do anything wrong. And as we know from the Bernstein principle, the body will organize itself to the ultimate goal. And we all know that the body will never harm itself as long as it's able to stay in his own cocoon, in his own window. If you force that body to go outside, then you might run into trouble. So that's why it's so important to know the profile. And obviously, I mean, excuse me, I see it daily. For example, if I look at guys who had Tommy John surgery, and I just do a quick profile on them, I mean, you always see that it comes back to two things that happened through the years. I mean, everybody's talking right now about the pitching pandemic and all the injuries and all the shoulder injuries. I mean, I don't know if you know, but did you know that only this season, I mean, obviously playoffs are still going on, but the regular season, MLB teams lost $660 million and over 30, almost 31,000 days only from pitchers. 660 million on salaries thrown out by people who weren't able to go on the bump when they needed to because there were injuries. And a lot of the injuries come, I mean, nobody talks about, but for me personally, one of the big things is pitch design these days. I mean, pitch design, hey, we want to have you more like, hey, that slurve leads more horizontal movement, but hey, that guy might be a vertical guy, which means like, hey, he needs to have a higher arm slot. Or that guy needs to have a lower arm slot. And you know what? We want you to throw a breaking ball. You need to have more vertical break. But that guy, his normal arm slot is more from the side. Now you're going to bring him up. So right there, you're going to create the injuries. Why? Because you're not coaching the intent. You use your data, your information to make that the goal. Well, the goal should be the individual and putting him in his perfect profile to get the best data possible from that individual.
So back to the idea of skill and how that intermixes as well. How do you guys see, again, developing the need to develop the actual skill itself comparatively? Like, for example, if we just go external goals, I just shoot balls at guys, have them try to hit a line drive, right? Try to, hit or execute this external goal. With that being said, even if I do everybody with the same exact training, right, with the same exact goals, with all those other things, obviously there's going to be discrepancies and who's better and who's worse, right? So how do you guys look at that in the terms of training for the actual skill for the sport when we could be the same guy, a same player can be doing the same exact task and training as somebody else, but get massively different results. And even if it's something as simplistic as shooting a machine at a player and just asking them to hit, again, what would you say there when it comes into like the actual training of the skill for that specific sport rather than getting everybody into profile? Because also, I mean, let's call a spade here also as well, right? Like, obviously there's also a ton of injuries that happen that are collisions, that are, other things that are also happening as well, that are things that are not, there's incidents that happen. Like the number one correlation that they found in MLB for injuries, especially to pitchers, is how long they've rested in between starts. Not to say that that's the only thing. I think it's multi-layered, as you mentioned. I think there is guys that are being asked to throw from slots that they can't stabilize, they can't coordinate, that all those other things. And I'm not a pitching guy, just more so from worked at facilities that are really high up with a lot of these pitchers. And again, that's something that we often found. And also too, I think there is some misunderstandings of, as Rasan, I'm sure you can connect with when it comes from a biomechanical lens and how we calculate how much torque is on the elbow. We're not taking in the system and how it's able to dissipate some of these forces and some of these things that are also as well. But when you specifically look at within training, there's obviously guys that are within their profile that are still not performing to a very high level. And so how do we reconcile some of those processes where when someone is in their profile, but they're still not, performing to a really high level?
Want to say something, Prash?
Yeah, a few things. I guess in my sport, Joey, just so you're on this, have you ever seen my sport?
Yeah, I mean, I've watched highlights and I don't know if I've ever watched a full game. Let's put it that
It can be a long game. We've got a 5 days of cricket in one format. Okay, so what I found in our kind of coaching, we almost refer to some players as net players. Now, what they do is they do a lot of machine work, which is great. Okay, so I did a study a while ago. And what we were doing is we were working on, they were bat in their normal way. They've got no visual cues now because it's just the machine firing out a ball. We're moving around the machine so it can pitch land anywhere. So we're allowed to bounce a ball. We can move the ball in the air. It can move off the pitch, whatever. It can hit you in the chest. It can go straight onto your toes, wherever. So there's not much, there's minimal time to see this and deal with it. What I found is like when we actually put them in their preferences and then got them to do certain movements at the certain times, within 20 minutes, we would find that they could face between 8 and 12 miles an hour faster in pace. Now, the trouble is that didn't always translate into the game because we're missing the perception action cycle.
Yeah.
So what we saw was in a lot of training, like we get lots of people trial for our teams. Our teams will play counties and national teams and things like that. And a lot look amazing in the nets. This is just a training environment, even with like bowlers coming in and stuff like that. When you actually chat to them about what are they actually looking at, for instance, loads of them don't know. They're actually waiting for this ball to come out and reacting to it.
Yeah.
And then when you deep dive into it a little bit further and actually say to them, right, can we begin to, so there's different ways that we view the ball. Okay, so one might be a narrow focus. So in my sport, there's a massive cue that people use, which is watch the ball. I don't know if they use that in baseball. Is that something that people say in baseball?
Keep your eye on the ball, or yeah, I'm sure it's
Yeah, that kind of thing. Okay. Now, for me, I'm more peripheral vision, broad focus. So when I do that, I actually get worse results from doing it. And my vision, if it sounds like you're on the same plane,
yeah.
my vision, what I do is I'm broad and I'm looking at arms, elbows as they're running in. So my kids, like we had 12 of them go for England trials in one age group. And one spin bowler in particular, the first step he took, we like googly, top spinner. These are just variations. And he was like,
Yeah.
this is really bugging me. What are you doing here? But I can pick up all those bits.
Yeah.
But when I asked central vision, as I found out later, to do it, they were like, I don't know what the hell you're seeing. Like, I don't see it.
Yeah.
Actually, you go into one to see the other and
Mm.
stuff like that. So we've been going through like, are you actually watching what's going on? And we actually take an action cam, place it halfway down the wicket to look at the bowler
Mm.
and they'd come in, bowl, and then they'd say the line, the length it pitch, what was it actually doing? And then we rewatch it as a group and we do like occlusion sort of work where we stop the video and see if we can predict that ball and things like that. We look at visual cues when we're fielding, for instance, what shape is the batter actually making? What are you looking at? Are you tracking the ball the whole way? Are we looking at body shape and things like that? And I don't think anyone really looks at this stuff. They're more very reactive to stuff. So I think a lot of the stuff, you can work on the most perfect technique, but if you don't work on how, what are the cues that they're really looking for, what is the appropriate action to actually put on it or explore? Like we would say, it might be the same feed. The bowlers are told bowl in this area, and we'll have different coloured coned areas and say, right, this time we want you to access blue. Can you go red? Are you good enough to now hit yellow and stuff like that, and just challenge them a little bit more? So there's all sorts of things you can do, but you know what? I've lost track of your question.
Well, no, yeah, I agree. First off, I think everybody would agree here. There's a lot of ways to develop athletes, right? There's so many ways they can get better at so many different things, right? And so I think that all those definitely along with it. And so, Steve, kind of like what I wanted to bring back with you is as Bertrand was kind of expanding on these different ways that we and movement signatures, and also when we went through the different ways that they can respond within those patterns, right? As we mentioned, and as you said, that they're, they can, it's more fluent, right? They operate on a spectrum based on task, based on what they're being asked to do, based on all these other things, right? With pitching, I definitely see the correlations as you mentioned, and also too from how I view the body on the other side of that, right? Like if the body is built, not only I say this with the pelvis all the time. I get PTs all the time. We have a professional athlete come in and they go, man, he's got the most stable hips. if you test them, everything's going to be amazing, blah, 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 blah. And then, again, I'm like, yes, on your table, he's very strong. The moment he gets into his, he goes to move, if it's not coordinated, do you actually have stability, right? Because again, you can have the muscle strength within a table test, but if it's not coordinated into like how their body's moving within real time and this thing, I can see the instability in the lower half, right? I can see the instability with these things. And then also specifically what I wanted to mention, and I'm interested with you guys with this as well, right? Is when we look at the pelvis, right? The pelvis dramatically changes. It can have some dramatic changes throughout somebody's lifetime, right? And what I mean by that is like obviously you have the base structure and some of the things, but I'm talking about you can build asymmetries, right? You can have again, along with that, as they gain weight, as they have injuries, as they do the same motion over and over and over again, these asymmetries now build. Now, sometimes those are advantages, and those are things that obviously we're all asymmetrical from the get-go. Like my heart's on one side of my body, right? And you go through all these different organs, we are asymmetrical from our being, right? My diaphragm is bigger on one side than it is on my other side, right? All these things, there is natural asymmetries. But what I'm wondering here, right, is like, for example, as athletes age, typically they lose range of motion. And so their movement patterns will change, right? And now I'm not saying necessarily that means that their hands all of a sudden go from being next to their head to now they're doing some crazy thing, but it might be their stride length might change. For example, the one I'm thinking of for specifically is like Alex Rodriguez, right? So A-Rod, back when he played, and I know I'm getting into specific players, but I just want to give the example of somebody, right? When he was younger, he would do this bigger leg kick and he would really get forward, right? But then when he got older, he'd pick his foot up and put it right back down where it was, right? And again, for me, when I look at the pelvis, and I've had athletes that I've had over since they were 12 years old, all the way up to the big leagues, right? And then with this is I've seen their hips and the adaptations that their pelvis has done. Like, for example, if the strength coach, they get in the weight room and the strength coach starts having them do all these exercises, right, that are, very posterior dominant, and they were already tipped. They already had anterior tip pelvis, the rib cages was already flared, and now we're loading that pattern with a bar on my back of 400 pounds, and we're doing that pattern over and over and over again. I've seen them lean more and more into extension, right, and get stuck in some of these positions where they can't even access flexion. It's not even, it's like, again, we have athletes that have gone so far down their patterns that they naturally had an anterior pelvis tilt. They naturally have these things, but as they train in the weight room more and more, they lose access to all of these other ranges of motion that they had when they were younger. So when you guys look at this from, again, when we look at this from your guys' view, how do you view those things of complementary, and how are you taking these things in as you're viewing, again, obviously motor signatures or things from that way?
Yep.
Bertrand?
There you go, Steve.
No, I mean the only thing I wanted to add to that. I mean, even if there been like A-Rod you just took as an example, or the guy that has been in the gym for years and totally kind of like you said, totally. If we put those guys through a simple profile, that body will be coordinated the same way as before.
Mm.
So being in the gym wouldn't change that.
Mm.
Wouldn't change that coordination. So he will still have that same coordination. It will still, because as we do those profile tests, it has nothing really to do with it's not strength tests, it's coordination. Is your body coordinated? Yes or no? That's what it's all about. Is it in its perfect way of moving? If it's in its perfect way, like I mean, Rashad also referred to it, the perceiving exercise. Is it in the right position? That's what it's all about. And it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't change if you're a lot in the gym or whatever. I mean, it could change if you have a very severe car accident or whatever, and you were really, I mean, your body was really messed up. That after that, if your body makes adjustments, I mean, that's a possibility. But other than that, there's not going to be anything that can change about the coordination of your body itself. So obviously, that body will start moving differently because it is put unnaturally in a situation like you said yourself, and then more in that, and then the bar in your neck and that type of stuff, and they lose all flexibility. That's what you also see with players, for example. I mean, for example, an action has three phases. You have the observation phase, the preparation phase, and the actual action. Now, you have the action and the observation phase will always use in your most strongest muscle chain. The preparation phase will always be in your opposite muscle chain, which means that if you train a certain way and you which doesn't allow you anymore to do that preparation phase in your weakest muscle chain, and you're constantly in that one chain, then obviously, I mean, you put extra stress, extra pressure on it, and it's going to break down. So that's why it's so important to know the signature of the individual, know how he's coordinated, know how he's been drawn by his mom and his dad in order to go further.
Did you want to add
Okay.
anything to that, Bertrand?
Yeah, I will complement what Steve just said. So I know it's difficult to imagine all the things because there's a lot of complexity inside. Nevertheless, let's imagine, to make a metaphor, that your profile is like a house. Okay, you have a house, and on each side of the house, you have one door. Okay, so your profile is composed of the four doors and the four faces, and you can go in and out independently where you want. Those four doors, they are the four motor skills that you can use, 1 to 4. Okay. Okay, you have the main entrance that may be the one where you go in and out the most, and you may have an exit like security exit or fire exit where you go less. But still, you can use all four. And the rule is, if one is open, if you use one, the other one are closed, which means you can close the main one and you can use another one. You can always close one and use another one. So your profile is the dynamic between the opening and closing of each of the exit, or each of the entrance, which means the flow state, or the fact that you could be in a flow state, is the freedom to open and close the doors. So if you train and if you are stuck in a muscle change because you overtrain that muscle change, you are in jail, and your profile is anything but a jail. It's freedom to move from one system to another system as you need. Okay, depending on the context and on the constraints you have to face. So the flow is really a state of mind and state of the body where you are not in a position to create problems, but you let solution self-organize. And for that, you need to know yourself in a way that you trust how your body is self-organizing. So the learning process of skill acquisition is giving you time and space to experience without anything else but the actual constraints of your sports. Okay, having nobody saying anything but just you experiencing without trying to copy any model. We were trying to mimic anything, but just listening to your body. And that's another sentence I created a long time ago, which is listen to your body, not anybody. And that's not easy to do. It's easy said, but not easy to do, because you have so many influences around you in terms of, sports, pressure, performance, results, social things, that you forgot yourself. You are more prone to forget yourself into that jungle. And nobody is really listening to their body because we are listening to other voices. And all the techniques, most of the techniques are good because if you put them into context from the guy that succeeded
Work for somebody.
using that technique, it will be okay for the guy, but it's not, it doesn't mean it's suited for everybody. So
Yeah.
the one size fits all, we know it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So the patience with Ralph, with my friend, we had a tendency to say that, okay, as a coach, you are the student. The coach is a student. The athlete is the university. So you need to go and register yourself to the courses, because he's giving you courses, observation courses, and everything, so that you can listen to how he is functioning and what are his needs in different contexts. So the being humble is one of the, I mean, most difficult quality of the coach, because everything is based on knowledge and understand that coaches wants to acquire knowledge.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best knowledge is accepting not to know and asking. Profiling, when you're profiling, you're asking, in fact. Okay, you're asking the other guy to show how he or she is functioning.
So would you guys say, or would you agree with the sentiment that obviously knowing your profile can be hugely beneficial, but also too, along with that, when you look at the holistic development of the athlete, you also have to consider these other areas, right? Like how they are training, how they are being coached, how they are, what tasks that they are being asked to do within their sport. Like, for example, basketball compared to hitting a baseball, right? You tend to see different body types, different shapes. Again, athletes that, can create a lot of, again, I don't know how you guys would classify it within your guys' language and categorization. Maybe that's I don't know if you guys consider it narrow, or I don't know how you explained it earlier. Because we look at
morphological differences.
Yeah.
We call it morphological differences. Okay, you can have bigger segments and everything. So you have to take into account the morphology of the guy.
Yeah.
And at some point, how the guy's coordinating everything. I think analysis of the context is a must. You need to understand all the constraints and to have a really global picture of what's going on.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you need to understand first what are the inner constraints that the guy is born with. So you don't have any. I mean, we also profiled handicapped people. Okay, so sometimes before and after, when they had injury or accident and everything, most of them don't change profile. What they change is the way they use their profile.
Can you unpack
Okay,
that?
so
Yeah, can you say that? Can you expand into that a little bit more about how they use their profile?
Yeah, as I said, you have those four way of functioning inside your profile, and your profile is the dynamical, let's say, the dynamics between the four things that I just presented before, which is one door giving the access to another one, closing and opening and closing and opening, the four systems. So you may have a moment in your life where you are more using one and less the others. But before you are facing an accident or something, you may be using less the first one and more the second, the third, or the fourth. Which means the way you use your house with all the entrance or exits could move or could change during your life because of what you experienced.
Got it.
And the house is not changing. The way you use it is changing.
Got it. So that's how that makes, so I get what you're saying there too, as well. It's like, hey, this is your house, right? This is your motor signature, but at the same time, there is different expressions of that motor that motor signature that come out in
Exactly.
different circumstances based on all the contextual requirements that are important, right? So it's not as there is some structure, but there's freedom within the structure. If that's a way of saying it. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's why, if I jump a little bit here, it's why it's not honest to sell a profile to somebody saying you are this or that.
Got
You
it.
need to validate the dynamic, which is taking this time so that the person can experience what it's like to move inside and to change posture according to the profile, according to the needs. So if I go to my second, third, or fourth, and away from the first, what does it mean? What does it mean for me? And when we validate a profile, it's always the person having the profile that is validating with the coach, okay, with the practitioner. And we never say to somebody, you are like this or you are like that. So there is a deontological factor here when you use profile and motor signatures, which means you should not put something on top of the others because the guy already has a motor signature. So doesn't need to be classified in anything, but you need to go along with the person so that what you see, what Steve sees when he's profiling, what Prashant is seeing when he's profiling, is understood by experiences, by moving, by doing, by throwing, pitching, and everything, and understanding the changes inside the profile. Because the dynamics is what has to be validated. In fact, a profile has to be validated through the dynamics of the different system. When you recover, when you're stressed, when you're under emotional state, when you are that and that, okay? That's how you validate the profiles, which means you have to be careful about people that say you are like this or you're like that, and that wants to put you inside something. No, you already have something. You already have everything. You just learn to be conscious about what you have already.
Got it. So, and then would you also agree within that, right? As you mentioned, right? Again, as these things get shared sometimes, and like you said, someone gets assigned to these things, it becomes a rigid this or that, right? Rather than a spectrum of movement, right? One of the things, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, Bernstein's principles of degrees of freedom problem and some of these other things, right? It's like having a car with 12 steering wheels, right? Like, great, I have all these steering wheels, I have all these options, but at the same time, more options isn't always better. Right. And so, again, there's a reason why we have one steering wheel that controls both wheels in the front of the car, right? And eliminating or coordinating the good options, like, right, that are useful within the constraints of the task that we have at hand, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is specifically is, as you mentioned, one of the things that's talked about in this more self-organization and this principles theirs of attractors, fluctuators, all these other things. I know that's more Franz Bosch, angle, but more the sense of bandwidth. And as you talk about the house makes me think of the word bandwidth. I don't know if that translates well over, but Randy Sullivan talks about bandwidth, right? Meaning that we operate within this bandwidth, which is kind of when you describe the house, that's what I think about is like this ability to, everybody has a different bandwidth, everybody has a different house, but at the same time, there's different options within those houses that I have within, an athlete, right? And so I guess my question, therefore, back the other way, is another way that it gets packaged or sold, or people talk about it within the space, is that again, the removal of these other contextual items, which is the training, what they're doing with their coach, what they're doing these things, and like it's just this one thing that houses while it is, I see how you guys are viewing it from a foundational standpoint of like, hey, this is really important for you to know, but also too, like as you mentioned, it would be really applicable for their strength coach to know, their coach, their skill coach to know, their, private PT to know, right? To their, all these other things to know, because there is these other things that obviously go in when someone's recovering from injuries. Cause I see this all the time with PTs, right? Guy goes in there because he had a knee injury. He goes to recover, and then now the PT's working on his rib cage. Now the PT's working on all these other areas of his body. Now he's also trying to get him him to be more stable in this joint and that joint. And, all of a sudden it goes into all these other areas. And like, as we mentioned, they might be coming back into the space of with their skilled coach and the guy saying, oh yeah, his lower half is so stable now. But I see that as such a limited perspective, as you guys are kind of mentioning, is there's this view of coordination. So the question, I said all that to say within this coordination is, I see coordination through some different lenses, right? There's how you guys are describing it, which is these patterns and signatures that you have and coordination within that signature. But then there's also coordination specifically tied to task, correct? Right? Meaning like basketball, I could be moving in my preference, but I'm not very coordinated within that movement that is required for basketball, right? Like my shot might be, again, is that movement very coordinated? I practice this movement all the time. It becomes much more and more coordinated, right? So how do you guys view coordination from a set standard of what I have from youth comparatively of coordination that is developed over differential learning and all of those things? How do you view those pieces?
Well, if you talk about, I mean, right there, first of all, if you talk about bandwidth and training, let's combine those two for a second. That's where different differential learning comes in. Professor Wolfgang Schulhorn is big on that. I mean, even by doing it wrong, your body's going to learn. So you got to put the body in such a different amount of ways of doing it on positions and that type of stuff to use that bandwidth, as you call it, to find that perfect way for you to do that. But now the same thing as you took the example, for example, somebody who's recovery from a knee injury and he's going to the excuse me, to the trainer or whatever. Now, another thing, to go to that trainer, he should know what type of mover that guy is. He should know is he, for example, a concentric athlete or a plyometrical athlete? Because if you don't know he's a concentric athlete and you let him do like 50, 60, 70% of his workloads, you're going to put him on plyometrical exercises. You're going to put him more in danger than he already was. So in his rehab, you're already causing the next problem.
Yeah.
Because a concentric athlete can only do about 25, 30% of his daily workload can be plyometric exercises. I mean, a plyometrical athlete can go up to 70%. But these type of things, it's not only on the field, it's in the gym, it's in the trainer's room. Everybody needs to know that. Another thing, what would be great, for example, in rehab, if I know the signature of my player, and he's in rehab, and I'm working with him, as Prashant said earlier, because of the small and the big loop. Okay, if you're able to put him in and do his treatment in the small loop, then his recovery might go quicker by knowing these type of things. So this is so important, and that's what a lot of people forget. They're only thinking like, hey, you know what? It's when we're on the field, he should be in that position to swing the bat or throw the ball or whatever, or kick a soccer ball or hit the ball with a tennis racket or a golf club. But it's also off. I mean, is that guy having a high or low mobile point? I mean, in the gym, you should know. You should know where the apps more isometrical and the obliques more dynamically, or vice versa. It's not the same for everybody. So all those things are so need to be in one package in order to make that athlete better.
Mhm.
And that's the big thing where we get lost and we go by that, that's, for example, re-app on TJs. Okay, this is the program, and we go like 100 feet on throwing, and then the next day we go like 120, and then I mean, and 10 throws and 15 throws. It's all about the individual, and that's where we lose everything right there.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Prashant, you look like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just thinking it might be really useful if someone, maybe Steve, let's say, because you could add more baseball context than we would, maybe just go through some of the key parameters so that he's more aware of, what kind of things there might be, and then he can kind of circle back,
Yeah.
when he's asking about. So, for instance, Joey, do you ever watch soccer?
Uh, not a ton. Not a ton.
And you got to live. All
Yeah.
right. So in
Bad
soccer, right,
question. Bad question.
you know how it was.
Well, to be fair, let me give some context to that. I honestly, baseball, as I watch the most of, but even in baseball, I love the behind the scenes. I love training. I'm obsessed with training. I love behind the curtain. The game itself is really entertaining. I again, more in person than watching it on TV. And you got some
Hmm.
announcer doing its thing. But in any case, just to be fair across the board, I don't watch a lot of sports. So
I'm the same. I barely watch any cricket, so I've got journos sending me videos of, can you explain this or that? But
yeah,
a fascinating thing is, like, if you think of biomechanics and things like that, right? Imagine that there's a stationary ball. I need to kick it to the goal, 30 yards, right? I'm going to run up, create some sort of momentum. My left foot might plant because I'm right footed. I'm going to kick it and go through the object and follow through, right?
mm,
And I'm expecting that to go a distance. If you watch some of the best footballers that have ever struck a ball, they
yeah,
almost hit it and retract or
yeah,
hit it and slide over to, and yet it's an absolute bullet.
mm,
So in the baseball world, if you've ever seen, I was watching some 108 stuff where they talked about pimping the finish and
well,
retraction and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah, like some of that doesn't make sense. So
mm,
when you look at it from biomechanical point of view, you're thinking like that just doesn't even make sense,
mm,
right? Have you ever thought of like pushing an object? So imagine like I've had a car in neutral and you're trying to push the object.
mm,
Could you imagine pushing it with straight legs? What would you need to do to push it with your legs? What would
yeah. I'm gonna get an deflection. Yeah.
you don't?
Hmm.
You actually don't. Some people don't. And it's fascinating. But
Hmm.
all of this stuff is actually possible,
Yeah.
right? But what I think, like, if Steve's okay with it, maybe just walk through some of the things with a bit of baseball context.
Yeah.
Walking, walking.
I was going to say too, obviously, I want to become more familiar too with how, and I know, look, I'm not saying that we're going to cover all these things in one conversation, but obviously there's some mixture of terms of, how
Mm,
different people would classify, right? And then also what they're grouping together and someone's categorizing it as this. And then somebody else has a different algorithm, right, of how they would calculate it and identify something as something else, right? So,
mm.
specifically, I think, like along with that, and also too, if I'm correct, I think you guys also have some different ways of testing compared to other people as well. But again, I could be off, but I'm just throwing it up.
Yeah, it is quite different. Steve, would you
Yeah.
like to maybe go through some? Oh, sorry, Bertrand.
No, go, Steve, if you want to go.
no, you can go first. I'll go after you. No problem.
Yeah. Just okay. So we don't test. Yeah, yeah. Good. We profile, which means we get rid of the word testing
Okay.
because it has some negative, positive things, it's good and bad, and so okay.
Mm,
So profiling is more like neutral thing because there is no good or bad profile.
got it.
Okay, but there's good or bad tests. Okay, so that's a problem. So the profiling, in fact, we created the profiling back to 89. We started the first things. And we made it evolve to 1.0, 2.0, up to what we call now 4.5, trying to prepare the 5.0 and after. So What people are using most of the time, they use what we were using in the past,
Got it.
and they may not have understood the evolution of the profiling skills.
Got it.
The profiling skills evolved because of the clients, the athletes, the people.
Mm,
We had to respect the dynamics of the profile, the dynamic of the people. We have to respect the fact that when somebody is coming to you, you don't know the person most of the time. You don't know what they are experiencing, what they are currently living, what is their shape, state of mind, physical problems, and everything. Okay,
great.
and we need to have a protocol or something that is good enough in terms of welcoming the person as the person is at the moment you are doing the job. Okay, and not trying to go for a result right away. What some people are selling. We're not selling a result when we are profiling. What we are doing, we are selling a sensomotoric experience, which the person will feel during the profiling protocol when she is ready or she's not ready. What happens when she's here and she's not here? Ready, not ready. So we are talking timing, and we are taking time to explain that there is a lot of possibilities inside the profile. And if we witness that now this is ready, the things that are not ready, they could also be later available. Okay, so we already in the profiling, we don't want to put people in jail.
Okay. Yeah. Could you unpack literally what you just said? Because I thought there was a nugget in there. You said, so basically, tell me if I'm interpreting this correctly. What you're saying is if I try to profile somebody at a single moment in time, I might misprofile them because I'm lacking a ton of context.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Profiling, I mean, the body has a contextual intelligence. The intelligence of the body is contextual. So when you ask the profile, it will give you a picture of the moment, like
Got it.
a flash, which means you have to take those details and put them back into context, which is back in the current experience that the person is having before and after she's coming to you. So you need to be humble enough, to be open enough, not to go to a result right away, which still I can say a lot of people don't do because they are going for results. It's very easy to sell a result, but if that detail, the result is a detail, that detail is not put back into context, you can make exactly the contrary of what you're supposed to do. So you're really closing the thing and not opening. For us, it's really an experience of how to open myself towards my resources. Okay, so to understand and being more conscious about what can I use when I'm such and such. Okay, I have that and I have that and I have this. Okay, so it's getting aware, getting conscious about all the resources that are available in a body. Okay, and there are all the four that I presented, the four motor skills. They cover all our needs, and there will be always one of the four that is the best solution for your actual moment. Okay, that's I'm coming back to the Zidane story of the soccer story, which is he didn't understood what was going on, but he could do it because the context was appropriate. Okay, and that's something that happens in the flow state, because again, for us, the flow state is you don't create problems. You just take what is and you do with it. It's contextual intelligence.
Love that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Steve, did you kind of want to open up, like, as he mentioned, specifically within the baseball, some ways of, how did you describe it again, Prashant, where you're talking about like different profiling terms or categorizations?
Yeah, there's different sort of preferences that you get within it. But Joey, just to explain, for instance, I went to Paris
Yeah.
and I was doing my course in English, and then we had the people that speak French natively doing profiling at the same time. And
Yeah.
to give you an idea, one group, and I'm talking literally 30-second gap between these two, one group where someone's profiling me and we've got someone translating.
Mhm.
I've got my small loop profile of D4. And then literally 20 seconds after, I'm doing another one and I'm back to R1 because they're able to speak English to me straight away. And both groups are like, who's got it wrong? But they haven't got it wrong. That was what was actually available at that particular time. And that's the important bit. So what we want to do is when we do the whole profiling, we find out where is the brain actually at that particular moment, what's going on, get it into the space we want, then go through the profile. What you don't want to do is just go up to someone and go profile because you don't know where the mind is at that point and you don't know what result you've actually
Well,
got.
well, and you bring up a good point, Steve, before I definitely want you to hit on some of these things too as well. I also have some thoughts of how certain things are being categorized, and I have certain hitters in my head that I've already started going through of like which guys, because I've seen these, obviously as training all these guys, I've seen all of these different signatures, right? I might call them something different than what you guys would call them, right? But I'm interested where the things overlap, right? But also, I wanted to bring this up is, specifically as you mentioned, a lot of times even, let's say professional athletes, or even people that are flying into my facility or something like that, right? Like they're in a different state of mind when you're traveling from city to city, or I'm in season, or I'm out of season, or, again, I just got here this morning and I rushed over there, and, like their nervous system's all obviously in a different place. And like mine's, all these things are different, as you mentioned, right? Like someone's talking to me in a different language and how that's going to change my profiling. And I thought that is also interesting contextually, is that obviously in different states of mind, again, it's going to change certain aspects. Now, again, you guys might be able to channel it down more of how to get them into this exact state of mind that you mentioned, but I thought it was an interesting nugget that you shared. That's all. I just wanted to expand on that. Yeah. Yeah, Steve. So what would you kind of add when you're coming from the baseball lens and you're looking at it from that way and you're categorizing, or maybe some of these things that are, bigger nuggets or bigger blocks there, or the houses, I guess we would say too as well.
Well, I mean, on the pitching side, for me, there's, two blocks I'm really looking at. Either if he's a walking top or a walking bottom individual, so anterior or posterior muscle chain dominant individual, in combination with the mobile point. That's actually the two structural elements of motor preferences. That gives us the motor family he belongs to. Okay, we're Bertrand, kind of like.
Can we pause just there for just a second, just so I can get some clarity? You mentioned obviously based on if they walk top or bottom, and some of these terms that are used. Why would that indicate to you specifically that guy is posterior or anterior muscle chain dominant?
Well, first of all, that's where the profiling comes into play. Right there, you profile it. You cannot do it just by looking at it. Obviously, you can see the 10% at both ends. You can kind of like see like, okay, he's definitely a walking bottom guy or a walking top guy. But the majority, you're not going to have an idea, because a lot of guys going to have like mixed signatures, or kind of like giving some type of properties of a different motor family than the other one.
Got it.
So right there, that's the big one. So that's the first thing I do, is try to get them in the two structural elements. Either walking top, walking bottom, and the high or low mobile point, and put them in that family group. The second big block for me is the two absolutes.
Sorry, Steve. I think Prashant wanted to add something on that point.
Steve, I'm just thinking this might help you out a little. So walking top, just imagine, I know the people listening to a podcast can't see it.
Yeah,
My forearm is just upright, okay? So imagine my hand is my upper body, and the forearm is my lower body, okay? If I take my palm and lean it forward, so that's my head is my palm, okay?
Yeah.
So what I'm doing in effect is leaning forward at this point. Now,
Mhm.
these will be your walking top people. And to stop us from losing balance, our back chains back here
Got it.
keep us in balance. And
Got
what
it.
you'll see is the opposite for walking bottom.
Yeah.
The upper body's just, it's not very obvious,
Yeah.
but their front chains will create that balance.
Got it. Okay, that's more. Yeah, sorry, Steve. That's what I didn't might have not asked the question really well. I was just because again, I'm familiar with that concept. I just when you were referring between the two, again, like I said, I'm mixing information of different how people categorize certain things. So I was trying to understand what you, specifically you're referring to.
Correct. No, no. I wanted to go there in a second. I just wanted to overall and then categorize it.
Got it. Got
So
it.
and then the second block for me would be, I mean, as I call the two absolutes of motor preferences. It's either being a vertical or horizontal oriented athlete, and also the mobile point.
Mhm.
Now, in the first block, as Prashant just said, I mean, you obviously have the walking top, walking bottom. That is all um, designed there where the center of gravity is located in our hip joint. So let's say about 50% of the world have their center of gravity in front of the hip joint. The other 50% has in the back of the hip joint. If the center of gravity was particularly on the hip joint, we won't be able to move. In order to move, we always have to try to make that disbalance. So if your center of gravity is in front of the hip joint, your shoulders and head needs to go, like Prashant just said, needs to go over the center of gravity to kind of like have that, to create a disbalance in order to start moving. I mean, for example, if it's walking, to be able to set the feet. Now, that center of gravity is in the back of the hip joint. In order to be able to create that disbalance, you got to move your hip forwards first in order to be able to set the feet to start the movement.
Got
Now, right there, knowing that either he's a walking bottom, walking top, where I referred earlier to, which is very important that I know in their observation preparation phase, in which muscle chain they're using or should be using. Okay, so everybody's talking about, hey, pitchers should hinge. I mean, if you compare it with, for example, Lincecum back in the days, he was the extreme, like all the way out, like a Blake Snell type of guy.
Yeah.
Well, 50% of your pitchers need to be there. Walking top pitchers need to be in the preparation phase in that position right there. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying as far as Lincecum was,
Yeah.
but they need to be up there, like a Blake Snell these days. Then a walking bottom pitcher, I mean, in the preparation phase, he should be in that hinge. He should be the guy like the Darfish, or he should be the Nolan Ryan type of guy right there. Like every standard book, pitching book is saying right now, you got to be in that hinge position right there because that's the strongest position. Well, for that 50%, it's the best coordinative position of those pitchers. So that's very important to do to keep those guys using the right muscle chains in the movement. Now, if we go to the two absolutes, the combination of being a vertical oriented pitcher or a horizontal oriented individual in combination with the mobile point, that will indicate, or not indicate, but dictate the most healthy arm slot. I mean, there's four possibility. Let's call them, back in the days, they called it sidearm, over the top, and then the two in between right there. Obviously, with a little degree of change, which is possible, obviously. But right there, those two things, if you mess with that, you're going to get in trouble. For example, the mobile point. Everybody has in his spine a mobile point and a stable point. Okay, that it's actually like let's call it the coordination center of a movement of your body. The mobile point, it's actually the part where your spine is most flexible. So about 50% of the population have a low mobile point. which is kind of like situated around L4, L5. High mobile point individuals have it around T8. So that means if you have a high mobile point, you have a low stable point, and vice versa. Now, what's the difference between those two? If you have a low mobile point, your hips and shoulders will always work in tandem with each other. If you have a high mobile point, your hips and shoulders will work dissociated from each other. Now, knowing that, if I have a guy with a low mobile point, and I'm going to work hip-shoulder separation on the field or in the gym or whatever, you're looking for trouble with the individual, because you cannot touch that, because that's asking almost for a disaster going forward, because he's going to break down. If it's not today, it's going to be tomorrow. So that's another thing right there. And that's both in throwing and hitting. If you work hip shoulder separation with a low mobile point, you can't just don't do that. A guy with a high mobile point, he's going to do it naturally. I mean, because of their work dissociated from each other. Now, if you combine that, for example, a horizontal individual with a high mobile point will have this arm angle as his most healthy arm slot, because that's a straight line with the mobile point. Obviously, it's in the back, but and the same thing with vertical low mobile point, which it's going to be, for example, Kershaw. Pedro Martinez is going to be right here, for example, or a Bumgarner, those type of guys back in the days. So that is so important to know going forward in order to teach or train your guys and that type of stuff. But again, as I said earlier, also the strength and conditioning guy in the gym should know that, because if you're a low mobile point guy, you go into the gym with me and I tell you like, hey, we're going to work hip shoulder separation right now, I'm messing with you. So these things are so important. And on the pitching side, for me, these are so standard. On the hitting side, it's approximately the same, because it's so important, those things. But then obviously you work on setup. Okay, even when you're gonna get ready. I mean, with, for example, walking bottom individuals, instead of kind of like, hey, you got to be in a ready position, weight on the balls of your feet. No, we're not going to do that. Just they have about 70% of their center of their weight are on their heels, actually, because those people need to start-stop system. The walking top, that's why they call it concentrical athletes. The walking top individuals, which we call plyometric, those people kind of like, as we say, a body in motion will stay in motion. They need that. They need that body moving in order to go further. They don't like the start-stop system, and that's the same thing. For example, with an infielder, and then we all like, hey, quick feet, move your feet, move your feet, move your feet. Well, 50% of the guys will need to do that. The other 50%, they're going to be on the back of their heels. They're faster moving left and right with that. You're gonna limit those guys in order to be able to field the ball. Another thing with fielders important to know is if they're vertical or horizontal, which means we all seen them. You know, the fielders, they always find a way to kind of like get behind the baseball. You know, get behind the baseball. I mean, square up when they feel. And then they get other guys, they kind of like, they go to the back end and the forehand as soon as they can. And that has to do with being a vertical or horizontal oriented athlete. I mean, a horizontal oriented athlete, they always try to create angles. So that means knowing that also reflects to hitters. For example, if I'm a vertical oriented athlete, for example, I always want to have my shoulders square with the baseball, for example. I want to create angles as less as possible. So I'm on deck circle. I want to have my and just kind of like take my warm up swings and get my timing. I want to have my both shoulders square to the pitcher. And a horizontal guy wants to get like he's facing the guy like in the box because that's the way he perceives the ball better. So his action will be different, as we talked earlier. So all that type. I mean, these are just a couple things that will be very important. And I don't know if you saw a couple of the how you call it, a couple of the clips I posted the last couple of days on the mobile point and hitting. I mean, I don't know if you saw that the way that Tatis hit that homer against the Dodgers and that back foot kind of like almost stayed even and kicked back. But that has to do with his high mobile point.
Mm-hmm.
Because the hips and shoulders work in tandem. That's why those hips doesn't come through all the way. And even that leg kicks back in order to keep those hips from over rotating.
Yeah.
Compared with a guy with a low mobile point, for example, which I put out earlier too, they will have more like the standard thing we see in the books. Because a high mobile point guy, when he hits, he wants to have his mobile point, his chest facing point of contact.
Yeah.
A
How would
low
you,
mobile point will be facing with the hips, the point of contact.
yeah, I was interested with this, and I'm going to use two big time hitters just because of, again, some profiles and some things that I had looked in my head of patterning, right? If you look at two different hitters, somebody asked me this the other day about like Barry Bonds and like Juan Soto. All right. Obviously, neither one of those guys, typically kick back or scissor or do with the Tatis movement that you mentioned. Now, again, along with that, though, obviously, as you guys mentioned, there's definitely big variances. Like, Soto is really wide. He loves really wide base. He loves being really wide with the stance there. I also think connective tissue wise, they are very different from one another. Barry Bonds, for example, like he was one of the earlier when Prashant, when you were saying about a guy that stands super narrow, like Bonds, super narrow, feet right underneath him. Like again, anterior tip pelvis. He likes to be more on the balls of his feet, right? Again, very different. Where Soto, he's more sitting back. He's really wide with his feet, but neither one of them would do like Tatis, like would never do like a kickback move, generally with it. So when you look at those two, how would you profile just generally? I know that obviously with it, it's not that you've just by empirically like watching them, how would you explain some differences and profile between those two athletes? Oh, I think you're muted, Steve. Sorry.
Steve, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, Steve. There.
I kind of like did a basic profile on them. I mean, not in person,
Yeah. Yeah.
but from what I could find and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Which I also try to find as much non-baseball related stuff, just how they shake somebody's hands and that type of stuff. Just a natural way of doing. Now, I can tell you both of them have a low mobile point.
Okay.
So that's why they don't have the scissor kickback or whatever you want to call it. That's one thing. The second thing is, as you said yourself, Bonds on the balls of his feet, more straight up. I mean, more straight up. He's a walking top guy. I mean, 100%, which means like he's, as we said earlier. And then obviously Soto, wider base, kind of like sitting on the chair, kind of like stuff, weighed back, as I kind of like explained earlier right there. 70% of the way back, he's a walking bottom guy. Okay. So his Soto and myself were in the same motor skill family group. Right there. So, and that's the way they're going to use. But now, what's the biggest difference right there with those guys is how their lower body works. Because Soto will need, let's call it a corkscrew. If we take it from the pitching side, he will need that where kind of like load that back load and almost have his, what is it? Yeah, he's a left-handed hitter, of course. Have his back knee kind of like pointing towards the catcher, almost kind of like loading back and hitting. But Bonds is a walking top guy. So that lower body works completely the opposite. The same thing if you look at guys like, for example, Ken Griffey Jr. They will need that back foot kind of like turned in a little bit, and they're not have that load back. They need to go. They go forward right away. You kind of like mentioned already with A-Rod,
like
the
Mookie
difference.
Betts, like Mookie Betts, like needing to go.
Mookie Betts, here you go. Boom, he got to go. What's his name again? The old Cubs who went to the Astros right now. It was with the Dodgers. Howard.
Oh,
Same thing. Same thing. These type of guys, they go forward. Then walking bottom guys, they should have their back foot on the hitting way. They should have back foot a little bit under an angle with their, almost PG toe. You know, right there. Because if they want to have straight up back foot or even turned in, and they're going to turn and they're going to load that back loop and corkscrew, then that back foot you're going to see wibbling. And that's where they're calling the pitcher as or a hitter an unstable back foot. Well, it's just the wrong positioning. So they should already start their back foot a little bit under an angle. And the same thing with pitchers.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So so that's why, and then when Prashant, maybe a question for you here too as well. When you guys look at, I know that different groups classify things differently. How do you guys look at connective tissue when it comes into there's spiral lines or chains of movement? Again, some of these things that you guys have mentioned. But how do you guys look at connective tissue differences between athletes? Is that within the profiling? Do you guys consider it something different? Do you have a different name for it? Like how would you guys kind of look at any of that stuff?
So for me in my sport, we would normally go low mobile point, high mobile point to work out that disassociation between the upper and lower half. When it comes to how tightly wound they are and things like that, we'd almost say there's a bandwidth. Let's imagine one motor family had a bandwidth of that. When they are super tight, it might be a little bit more in here. So like, it's very difficult for me to talk in a baseball context around that. Like I could show you cricket examples. Wouldn't really make sense, but I can do that afterwards.
Well, and Steve, maybe for you back, the ping pong in here is that also, for example, Mookie Betts and Bonds both needed to get forward, but Mookie Betts he's got so much laxity in his body. He can get so separated. He can do all those things. Bonds could not. Right? Bonds, if you try to make Bonds get wide, it would be terrible. If you try to make Bonds get separated like Mookie, it would be terrible, right? So is that from again, I know that Prashant couldn't give us exact. Would you say what I'm saying there is kind of like what he's mentioning, Steve? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean the thing is with Bonds is a walking top guy with a low mobile point. I mean, obviously, as Bertrand showed earlier, those 4 motor families, he's a conceptual guy right there, which means that those type of guys, the way they move, everything is a little bit more, let's call it robust, robotic type of thing, kind of like, But on the other hand, those people have, for example, a very smart game plan. Mookie Betts, on the other hand, he's a walking top guy with high mobile point. So he belongs to the rhythmical family, which are guys that are very flexible, sometimes even extremely flexible, which could be sometimes a problem, but they're very, very flexible. Those people, they really need their rhythm, their own pace. If you try to kind of like slow down or make him faster or whatever, if you're gonna work on their rhythm, even if you don't change them, you just say like, hey, you got to slow down or you got to go faster or whatever, you're going to lose them because these things are so important for them. So, for example, Soto, I mean, he's a walking bottom guy with a low mobile point. So he's a global guy. He likes everything close to his body whenever he acting.
A quick
Compare it with for
example of that. He actually commented on one of my social media posts, and I had a guy with his arms really far away from his body, and he was like, he literally commented and goes, "How is he going to hit an inside pitch if his hands aren't close to his body?" Because he loves his hands super close to his body, and I knew that for how he moved, he would love his hands close to his body, and it'd be super important. I've trained all stars that need their hands right next to their head, and then there's guys that obviously need, that
That,
need their.
that's an important point. I want to intervene here,
Yeah.
because if we go back to the fact that your main system is what we call an initiation system. It's where you initiate your movement. You can be the guy that you just show with your hands far away. If it's his main system, he can come close, no problem. But he has to start far away. And the other guy you were mentioning with Steve, which likes to go inside and close, if he starts close, he can go far away.
Mhm.
But he needs to initiate close.
Got it.
So the adaptation has to be according to the dynamic of the thing. And of course, Steve, I know you like caricature, but a lot of people, in fact, that are like Steve was saying with walking top mobile point low, and I am one of them, have some kind of stiffness because of the way they function. But you also have guys like Federer, tennis player Federer, Roger, which is a guy like that, walking top low mobile point. And he was kind of one of the more fluid guy you could see on the tour. Okay, so it depends on a lot of other parameters, of course, and we have to be aware of being not doing too much caricature at some point, because we'll inside the family we'll find a lot of differences. Okay, so I wanted just to show that. I just met a guy. It's a YouTuber I met also in one of our education, and he's a dancer. He's also a guy walking top low mobile point, so conceptual guy, what we call her C4. They are quite rigid and everything in their mind because of the way they function. But he's hyperlaxed, which is has a lot of flexibility. He's a dancer, classical dancer, but he can do everything. And because of his morphology and the way he's shaped, is if you observe him, we could mix him with another family, because he's very, very like could appear goofy at some point. You see?
Yeah, he reminds me, Steve. He reminds me of Mike Trout. A lot of people think he's a loose mover because he's so like fluent, but meanwhile he's so tight, right? Like as you mentioned there, Bertrand. So I wanted to mention that for our listeners, right? Is sometimes they see how fluent their movements are, and they think this guy has a bunch of laxity, or he's Mookie Betts, but like he's not. And they can confuse that. So I wanted to give that as clarity to back what you were saying, but just for our audience that knows the baseball side. Yeah.
Yes. So the appearance, how they appear, is always dangerous, because when we see and we observe things, we have a left brain trap, which wants to simplify things and create a judgment, which is a generalization or a caricature of the thing, an abstraction. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you do this, you have to take one step back and be careful, because most of the time it will not be true.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, a lot too. So yeah, no, I think it'd be interesting on the same side of that. Like I said, the profiles and some of the things that you guys are talking about, or signatures, it's funny, we would call them movement signatures or also force signatures, right? How they move obviously creates general force signatures. Like we say this all the time. Certain groups that will do evaluations, they'll say, I need to get like 300 swings of you doing all these things, right? And it's funny because like I'm like, yo, I can measure you on the tee, front toss, off the machine. We need like 15 like things. And again, what I mean by that is not that we holistically have all these, but we can profile how you're moving off the tee is generally how you're moving. Again, is there differences? For sure. But as you mentioned, we can start to have some of these viewpoints where it's not necessarily it comes from the base of how you're viewing things in the first place, right? If you're viewing things, a lot of times I see a lot of groups, and I'm sure you can connect with this, Prashant, is especially from a science perspective, they collect a whole bunch of data and then they're trying to find a needle in a haystack rather than if you go and study and have a hypothesis, right? And you go and study, generally you got to be careful of confirmation bias, of course. But if you know what you're going for within your data and what you're actually looking for when you're profiling specifically like that, right? You don't need to do a whole bunch of random movements and then, do some of that. You can start to have like a basis for how you're formulating that based off of, philosophy differences. So I guess the other thing too, and I don't want to, I know we've been going quite a long time already now, and I know we're not going to cover everything there is to know all inside of one thing, one podcast. But I also, too, with this, one thing I want to make sure that, we hit on beforehand is I know that you guys are coming out with a English version of a book that you guys are now translating over, or you guys are trying to do that as well. And also too, if people want to know and learn more about these things, right, specifically within baseball, and I know this is just the start of conversations that we'll have with you guys too, and we'll see, what that branches off into. What are some of those things that you guys are doing right now? I really do like the ways that you guys are approaching of, it seems like there's some cohesion between us and you guys and how we view development and like truth of it's how things are being packaged or sold and some of those other things within the space when it comes to actual performance and like what that looks like, and not some magic trick. Oh, just move your hands here and then all of a sudden everything will you'll be the best hitter on the planet, right? All those things, right? So I just wanted you guys to also talk about briefly here is some of those resources so people, again, can learn more, because I know that one podcast, we're not going to be able to cover, all of these different intricacies, and you guys are putting years into knowledge. And also I know what it's like to acquire wisdom over years and change my thoughts and analyze all these things, right? And I know there's continuous new additions and other things as it comes back in performance, because again, as we mentioned, nature is so complex. The human body is so complex. There's so many contextual things for us to keep in mind. There's so many things that, again, I look at some of the things I did 5 years ago and I'd be like, man, I would never do now. Right. So I know that there's always that as well. So could you guys, I know that you mentioned the website earlier. I know there's some resources that you guys are working on, and I wanted to bring light and give you guys a chance to talk about some of those resources that you guys are developing when it comes to the United States and some of the things we might have access to that you might have access to in other countries already.
I can first give credit to Prash and Steve. Steve has a nice course that he designed for baseball and using motor preferences. So he may give the coordinates here for the people, and Prashant is preparing one for people from cricket that are interested in motor preferences. We are currently trying to find a publisher for the English version of our book. The book was out in French in 21, was already ready in 19. We had to wait 21, and now we have with the second edition in French in 24. But it's a 800 pages book, colored and everything. It took me 6 years to write, and more than 30 years to develop with my friend Ralph. Okay, so I know it's not an easy thing. We need to package that a little bit for the States. We will go over some courses in the States. Maybe Prashant could talk about that, and Steve also. But the idea is we have to package a little bit differently in the States than in Europe, and maybe we will find a solution.
Yeah, and I just want to make this point because Prashant, I know we kind of talked about this. I don't want this to be confused with other resources that had been previously. I know there's some things behind the scenes that we're happening with like resources and books. So also I want to be particular with what resource, right? So people don't go and purchase something that is not, again, not how you guys view things, and again, how you go about. I kind of talk a bit like biomechanics, right? Biomechanics, biomechanics. Someone you can't claim a science, right? You can't claim a distinction, right? There is multiple ways of how people interpret information, right? And so there is differences within ideologies, within philosophies, even though, for example, if I get the experts of biomechanics across the board, right? They're going to disagree on things. They're going to see some things the same. 20 years from now, there's going to be different perspectives on all of those things. That's true in every way that we evaluate.
And they are right to disagree.
Yes. Yes. And and also that's another thing that I've also enjoyed. And Steve and Prashant, both of you guys, and again, Prashant, I'm happy you guys jumped on, is as I've been explaining or going on social media, I tend to ask a lot of questions. I was the why kid when I was growing up. Why, right? But also too, along with that, right? I don't blindly, because I do care about the athlete that's in front of me, I don't just blindly start teaching things or incorporating things. And also too, I do have a substantial background of not only success with athletes, but also with a deep level of care for what the athlete is sacrificed to get to this point in their career. So I'm gonna be thorough. I'm gonna go through it. I'm gonna ask, tough questions. I'm gonna debate. And I also think I'm an academic mind, which I think we've gotten into a culture where if somebody disagrees with me, we should hate each other. And I don't agree with that at all. I mean, that is, we don't progress at all if we don't have these intellectual disagreements, or we bring up points and then we can talk about that issue and we could wrestle with it. And you know what? Maybe we should iron get sharpens iron, where we might see something that we didn't see before. That has been true my whole life of everything that I've learned and everything. When you get into college, you usually are learning information that is 10 or 20 years old that everybody generally accepts. And then even some of that you have to learn, you go get your CSCS here in the States, and then, it's like, I got to answer the questions so I'm right on the test, but it might be not accurate when I'm actually training an athlete. And I know that some of this debate and raising questions and some of these things, I think it's important inside the space, right? Like truth matters, right? And none of us have 100% the truth. We all have pieces. We all are trying to understand. We're all trying to learn more. And if we get into a place where, you need to accept this and there's no challenge, I think that that's a dangerous place for us to get in talking about anything. If it's political, if it's how we train athletes, if any of these things, like, this open debate, I think is really important. And I just wanted to tell you guys, from me, I've appreciated the openness that you guys are to not only challenging questions, but being open to also different experiences and things that we've had as well that I think have been very useful. So from me to you guys, I just wanted to say thank you for that. And then also to Prashant, I know that you want to grab something. I wanted to be clear with this because I knew that there were some things that have happened behind the scenes, and I wanted to be accurate about which book and resources that we are talking about.
Yeah, so obviously people wouldn't be able to see it, but we do have an action types book. So it's called The Bible of Motor Preferences, if that was translated across. Now, what we're planning to do is we're going to run some basics course. When I say basics, it is mind-blowing the amount of information you learn in that space of time. So what Bertrand's recently been doing, when I learned it, we do a module of 3 days, have a month's break to sort of practice those bits, learn it, do the next 3 days, and then whenever you're ready, you then move. That's the basic phase, just those 6 days. Then you move on to the certification, the next bit, and then that's another 6 days. Then you move on to validation, which is kind of where I am at the minute. But what he's been doing quite successfully in France is actually running 5-day condensed things, and almost a week or two later moving on with the next course, and people are picking up super fast doing that. So what we're looking to do is do the basic course where we go through how to profile all the foundational bits of motor signatures, what kind of things you're going to see, then add the contextual side of it. How does it look in the business environment, education, sports, all sorts of different bits there. And across the globe, globally, we've got about 1,200 practitioners globally, all using it in different contexts. I mean, people have used this to win Olympic gold in over 30 disciplines. People are using it in business to help CEOs calm down. So we look at the brain. So, for instance, when you're talking, you're kind of giving little clues as to how your brain functions and what your motor signature might be. And like, I've got a guy, Bertrand met him recently. Do you remember Sonny came to meet us at the course? So Sonny, for instance, his number one brain function is analysis. And what he absolutely hates is when coaches say, "You're overthinking this." Absolutely drives him nuts because they're not understanding that he needs to understand it, process.
Yeah.
Sonny will say to me, "Prash, you just told me about this. Give me a book." And he'll have ordered the book. 2 days later, he's punching me up on page 134. And it's like, I've got to read that thing.
Yeah.
And so through all of this, we can work out, how does a person see the world? How do they learn? How do they interpret? You know how the same cue can be interpreted in multiple different ways. You would have seen it yourself, right?
Yeah.
So we can better understand this and what kind of cueing you might use or conversations.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the education, we're going to look at trying to find a couple of venues across America. So Bertrand was looking at Chicago. I'm going to look more sort of the South side. So I'm going to go out and meet some different people and connect with them. And what we want to do is create a 5-day course, Monday to Friday, where they could do the basic course. And if people are interested, we can even put 2 of those on and then 1 certification course straight after it. So they can kind of progress quite quickly. And through the network of people that we have, there's so many different types of people. So Steve and I are a part of we have circles, spheres, and things like that where people share, say, sports knowledge or education and stuff like that, and then more specific things around like baseball, cricket would almost merge because they're kind of similar in certain aspects.
Yeah.
And we'll sort of work through modules and things. So where Steve would fit in, he can also add the baseball context and run workshops that are very specific to your pitching and your hitting and things like that. We've got different people that can do the same. So even in India at the minute, I'm doing coach education on a very general sort of level with action types. And then we're getting practitioners to do virtual sessions, drop in and do volleyball, all sorts of handball, all sorts of different sports, because we're getting lots of heads of different organizations coming together.
Yeah.
And I can't add all of their context. So there's going to be a whole bunch of different things going on. When it comes to the basics, like of places that you could look for information, motorsignatures.com. And we've published a few things on there. That's going to evolve. You will get more information. Steve's got Baseball Action ID. Was that the domain? Brilliant.
Yes.
I've nailed it.
www.baseballactionid.com.
Brilliant. And on there, you're going to see a series of how he's broken down all the different aspects of it and even combinations of different preferences together. What will you see? What's the explanations? So I think for you and the baseball world, that's a fantastic resource to explore as well.
Yeah. No, I really like it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think as soon as it's ready for the US, we will also put the dates and information on actiontypes.org, which is a multilingual site, German, French, English. But it's more for practitioners and for people that want to receive education. So I think there's enough of resources with baseball from Steve, with things from Prash and things from Action Types. But the idea is also to bring something to the US that is a bit different than what is already there.
Yeah, no, it definitely, like I said, some of the patterns and some of the things that you guys have mentioned, and also some of the things that I've seen and how I would adjust what I'm training based on what I'm perceiving from the athlete and how they're moving and things like that. I think are it's interesting and more to dive into for sure. Again, I think it'll be interesting from the other side of that. I'm happy to meet you guys virtually, of course. On the same side of that, if you guys ever happen to be in Vegas, I don't know when you guys ever would be, or any of the things in Vegas in the United States, but again, you guys have a facility. I would love for you guys to come in house and see a lot of the things that we do, and for us to meet in person. And then also too, again, along with that, I'll be interested. As you guys probably picked up, as Rashad just mentioned right there, is I am very analytical. I like to study and learn, all these different things. So on the other side of that, I'll definitely be interested in diving into more information that you guys, have as well, and what you've provided and the work that you've done. And I'm sure I'll have more questions. So appreciate all you guys and the time that you guys have given over. And who knows, maybe we'll do another podcast here soon, or we'll do something else, and go from here. But I really appreciate your guys' time and everything that you've given to our audience and all those things as well.